So it is, what is the date? Today is 10/5. It is October, y'all. It is officially, how do the news do it? It's spooky season. The mic I use is a Razer Siren Elite. Most of my setup, if you look at my YouTube, the channel that I have set up for you guys, and you go to my About page, I've got my full setup in there on how my desktop's set up. So if you're ever interested in seeing what Mr. McKeever uses, it's all in there for you. That's my complete streaming setup. So if you're ever interested, it's there for you. Also highly recommend, I'm going to start setting my channel up a little differently on YouTube. So I highly recommend, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because that way when I post stuff instantly, you'll get a notification. So that when I update stuff, it'll automatically send you a little notification saying, Mr. McKeever has posted a video. I'm going all professional now. Anyway, so I have a little bit of cognitive disorders. Veered way off there, right? All right, so we're going to talk about cognitive and perceptual disorders. So if I say cognitive disorders, what do you guys think about? What comes to mind? Brain stuff. Okay, good. Right? Thinking. Right, so when we think cognitive, we think kind of that higher level availability, right? Memory, higher order functioning, stuff like that. When we think perception, what's the big phrase that whenever somebody says perception, what's usually the follow-up to that? Perception is sight, okay, it is. But have any of you heard the term or the phrase perception is reality? Right? This is key to patients that have perceptual difficulties, right? Because the way they perceive things is their reality. Did any of you get a chance to see patients with psychological disorders at all when you were out in your first clinical? Or does anyone of you have some? Okay, Erica did. Do any of you have maybe family members that have kind of severe psychological disorders? Their perception is a lot different than our world, right? I had my ex-mother-in-law, right, had a couple different psychological disorders. One of them was bipolar type 1 and the other was borderline personality disorder. Right, Erica, some cognitive issues. Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk a little bit about that actually. But like I said, my ex-mother-in-law had some psychological disorders. And one of the disorders she had was borderline personality disorder. And one of the things we say about that is you can't, in psychology, we say you can't fix a borderline. It's one of the few disorders that psychology really has no answer for. Because a person with borderline personality disorder, doesn't matter what you tell them, how they perceive the world is how it is in their head. There's nothing you can do to break that perception. So, if I'm, I don't know, if I'm holding this tape measure and I know it's a tape measure, but somebody with a borderline personality disorder says, no, that's a ruler. Well, technically they're not 100% wrong, right? It does do stuff that's a ruler. But if I try to convince somebody with a BPD that this is not a ruler, it's not going to go well because in their mind, it's a ruler. And there's nothing I'm going to say. I could pull up the definition. I can do whatever I want. It's not going to change things, right? That kind of plays into a little bit of our political climate right now, doesn't it? Just a little bit, right? All of us have those friends that no matter what you say, they're not going to criticize one party or the other, right? Whichever side they lean on. I'm sure all of us have experienced one person like that. No matter what, doesn't matter what you provide them. Now, in my opinion, personally, it's one side a little bit more than the other, but that's my opinion. And you're not going to convince me otherwise. Just kidding. That's kind of perception, right? We have this perception of our world. Sometimes people have a perception that things are negative, right? And sometimes you may get this way where you just have this perception that the whole world is out to get you and things are just not going your way. And no matter how many good things happen, you're just sitting there waiting for the next shoe to drop, right? That's when you get in that negative perceptual disorder. So cognitive perceptual disorders can really kind of mess us up. So some of these disorders are some of the most puzzling, disabling difficulties a person can experience, right? Includes thinking, remembering, reasoning, and making sense of the world around us. It can have a devastating effect on our patients and our patients' lives and our families. And they may not be able to live alone once they have one of these disorders, right? They may not be able to get employment. They may not be able to sustain family and life relationships. And you got to think about that. And that's really true, right? If you have somebody that's walking around having delusions or having hallucinations and talking to Bob the Flying Dragon beside them, are you going to want to hire him? Right? I mean, you're not paying both people. So it can be a really negative stigma, right? It happens. People that have psychological disorders and cognitive perceptual disorders face some really, really, really tough times when it comes to the real world, right? Relationships. If you can't possibly agree at all with your significant other because of a cognitive or perceptual dysfunction, that relationship's doomed to fail. So these things can really be devastating on their lives. So what can cause these? Well, the two largest groups that cause these problems are CVAs, TIAs, and TBIs, right? CVA, cerebrovascular accident, right? TIA, transient ischemic attack or transient ischemic accident, whichever you want to call it, right? We're going to learn about those later in the semester, but the main difference here is a CVA is a traditional stroke. A TIA is often called a mini stroke, right? And I'm going to use quotes for it because it's usually not that many for patients, but usually most of the symptoms resolve within 24 hours on a TIA. And one of the things we're going to talk about when we talk about these is if you get TIAs, guess what it's setting you up for? It's setting you up. If you're getting baby strokes, it's setting you up for a bigger stroke. Exactly, right? When you have those, it's just getting you ready for a CVA. It's not like it's that far off in the future either. Now, TBIs, all kinds of ways we can get that, right? Traumas, MVAs, falls, violent accidents, obviously. Neurotransmitter deficiencies can cause problems with cognitive and perceptual dysfunctions. Vascular diseases and malformations, right? If you get some sort of a vascular malformation in the brain, that can really affect the way you may process things. Infections like encephalitis, right? Encephalitis literally means what? What does encephalitis mean? Yeah, inflammation of the brain, right? Exactly. Thank you, Adrian. It's Erica. It literally says encephal head, right? Itis, inflammation. So inflammation of the head. West Nile virus is one of the big ones we've talked about that typically can cause encephalitis because it's one of those few diseases that can jump. What's that thing called that protects the brain? The dura, yeah, okay, we got that. What keeps the infections out of the brain? That separation between, so we got cerebrospinal. So what's that called between the cerebrospinal fluid and your blood, your circulatory system? What's that kind of protective layer called? The blood-brain barrier. Do you remember talking about that in anatomy? Right? Where really stuff from the blood doesn't typically jump over to the brain, and stuff from the brain doesn't typically jump over to the blood. You know, we still process waste and materials that we need that way, but the brain and the blood system are very, very much split off by that blood-brain barrier. But West Nile is one of those that can really jump that blood-brain barrier. And there's some other ones out there that exist as well. Anoxia, such as near drowning or domestic violence, right? I always love the term near drowning. I don't know why we call it that. You either drown or you don't, right? I mean, I don't know. But, you know, what kind of domestic violence could cause an anoxic event? What do you think? I know it's not fun to think about, but what kind of violence can cause an anoxic event? Domestic-wise, choking, yeah, right? You would be amazed how many people come into the ER or the ED that have been a victim of domestic violence that come in with huge handprints around their throat. Waterboarding terrorists as well. You're exactly right. That definitely can. That's been shown to cause strokes quite a bit. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Bob's your uncle. Cardiopulmonary arrest and myocardial infarctions, right? That's going to involve getting blood to the brain. If your heart stops or you have part of the heart that dies off and doesn't pump blood efficiently enough, your brain can be affected. Benign or malignant tumors. What's the difference between a benign and a malignant tumor? Yeah, right. Active versus non-active, it's a good way of putting it. Most of the times we're going to think it's good versus bad tumor, right? And even a benign tumor is not necessarily a good tumor. It just means that it's contained, right? Most of the times when you have a benign tumor, there's very low chance of it metastasizing somewhere else, right? If you get something like a hematoma, hematoma is not what I'm looking for, hemangioma, there we go, which is a blood growth or blood tumor. It's really unlikely that that is going to spread and cause widespread cancer. It's typically considered a benign tumor. But you get something like liver cancer, and that can be a really bad tumor that can become malignant and spread everywhere. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Where might we encounter that? Where can we end up with carbon monoxide? Garage, right? Especially if you're one of those people that warm up your car in your garage. China, absolutely. You're not bad. You're not wrong there in places like Shenzhen and that. But yeah, so even in your own home, I remember this was probably, I'm going to probably say it was probably in the early 2000. It was probably 2000, 2001. In my home back in Pennsylvania, I had an oil furnace. You know, for those of you that don't know, in other areas, we have to have these big things called furnaces. And those furnaces are to keep you from freezing to death over winter because it gets down into the negative degrees. I know. I never turn my furnace on here. Now, I don't think my air conditioner ever shuts off, but never turn my furnace on. But most of the times, using electric furnaces back east is just way too expensive. You know, here, a lot of our furnaces are electric because we don't run them very often. We don't run them very long, right? It doesn't take long to warm up a building usually here in Las Vegas, right? But back east, you know, I'll tell you an interesting fact then too, but back east, right, it gets cold. So a lot of times we either have natural gas or oil burning furnaces. I had an oil burning furnace that burned kerosene and what do you call it? Whatever the fuel oil is called. Well, I didn't realize that the flue that came out of my apartment or my house actually ended up kind of clogging up and blocking off. And that's where all the gas, that excess gas escapes, what started feeding into my house. And man, I remember for about 2 or 3 days, I just, myself and my wife were feeling like crap and we couldn't figure out why. And back east, when you have furnaces like that, it's really important to have a carbon monoxide detector in the house. And after about 2 days of feeling like crap, man, that carbon monoxide detector was going like crazy. And it was 4 to 8 times the level of carbon monoxide that's supposed to be in the air in a normal house. And what was literally happening is our brains were suffocating. It's just really dangerous. It explains so much about me too, but it's really dangerous, right? Because our hemoglobin really likes transporting carbon monoxide. When you look at the structure and the layout of carbon monoxide and oxygen, O2, the red blood cells can't tell the difference oftentimes. So they'll grab onto that carbon monoxide and haul it off. And it'll deliver it to a cell like it's oxygen. So, you know, carbon monoxide is really deadly. Toxins such as alcohol. Now, again, everything in moderation. If you drink one drink every now and then, you're likely not to cause cognitive perceptual dysfunctions, right? But if you're a chronic alcoholic, right, where you're drinking every day and drinking heavily every day, you can really cause yourself cognitive dysfunction. You guys know this. I can guarantee all of you have encountered that one friend that drank too much on one night, or you were that one friend, and you definitely had some cognitive and perceptual dysfunctions, right? That's where we get beer glasses from, right? You go to the bar, you're out there hanging out and you're drinking, and you look across the bar and you're like, ooh boy, look at that guy or gal. Or tree, if they want to identify as a tree, I don't know. And you're like, and you're like eyeballing them up, sending them signals, and your friend's looking at you like, why are you making faces at the pole in the bar. And you're like, he or she looks good. And you're like, dude, it's the pole in the bar. No, man. Right? You definitely can have some cognitive and perceptual dysfunctions with alcohol. Maybe I just have weirder friends than you guys. Substance abuse, especially things like synthetic drugs, synthetic marijuana, synthetic heroin are some really big things that can cause lots of cognitive perceptual dysfunctions. What's that other one that's out there? There's one other one. I can't think of what it's called right now off the top of my head. There's another really kind of bad synthetic drug that's out there that can cause you some serious spice. There we go, which I think is actually synthetic marijuana, right? But some of those drugs are some of the reasons we get the Florida man stories, because they cause a person to go completely cognitively unaware, right? You guys have all heard the story of the person trying to eat the face of another. There was a guy in Florida that took some really bad drugs and tried to eat the face of another man, right? Turned him into a literal zombie. There's a couple cases in Florida where people have taken and decided they're going to try to eat an alligator live. That doesn't go out well, right? So that can happen. And then heavy metals. Lead's a big one, but there are all kinds of other heavy metals that can cause you problems. So, you know, lead's just one of the ones we mainly think about, but mercury, getting mercury poisons, possibility. Where do you guys consume mercury at? Does anyone know? Fish. Yeah. All your fish has some form of mercury, and some more than others. Tuna. Yeah, sushi's big, right? Neither do I. I don't eat anything that comes from the sea. I let what lives in the sea stay under the sea, but I'm not a vegan. There's no way that's happening. I like my red meat a little too much. Sorry, Renee. It's not happening. The cows are so cute. Yes, they're so tasty too. But mercury's big. I know. I'm sorry. You just have to eventually phase me out of the world, and then you get rid of somebody that consumes meat. But fish provide us a lot of mercury. And now we do need a small amount. Our body actually needs a little bit of that to function, right? But here's what's ironic about people that are like, oh, I'm an anti-vaxxer. Because if I put that shot in my shoulder, it's going to give me thimerosal, which is mercury, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to get autism. You actually get more mercury from 2 cans of tuna than you get from a vaccine. So I'm just saying, yeah. Maybe they've had a TBI and aren't thinking very clearly. All right, so cognition. It's a method by which we process information, right? We have knowing, understanding, awareness, judgment, decision-making, reasoning, intuition, and memory, all tie into our cognition. It also includes what we call executive function. So a lot of times when we talk about the difference between us and primates, right? Apes, gorillas, and stuff like that is we have this ability to have higher level functioning or executive functioning, right? The ability to plan, manipulate information, initiate and terminate activities, recognize errors, all that kind of fun stuff. But when you look at that, I mean, even primates have some of those abilities. They just don't have it as high a level as we have. We have a little bit more of a cognitive advantage, right? That's how we ended up being, you know, highest on the food chain. So we have perception. It's perceptual motor process, a chain of events where a person selects, integrates, and interprets stimuli. You guys right now are perceiving my lecture, whether you're listening to it or not, right? You're listening to your environment. I'm sitting here, and again, like we talked about with senses, I'm hearing my fan behind me. I'm paying attention to my screen, seeing if any questions pop up. My Apple Watch just went off because I forgot to mute it. I'm gonna mute my phone before I forget. So all of those are perceptions. It's the ability to select which stimuli requires attention and which doesn't. Right now, if you're sitting in your house right now and you hear a fire truck go by, what's going to go through your head? Say you hear a fire truck pulling up towards your house. What goes through your head at that given moment? Let's mute this. Nope, I don't want a pink phone. I want to mute. There we go. Now it's silent. Oh, it's not smart. Yeah, what's on fire? My grandma fell again? Okay, good. There's a couple of different things that can go through your head, right? All of that's going to come in a few moments, right? And you're going to process all that information. First thing, if it's a fire truck, usually you're going to take a stock of your environment. Is my environment on fire? You should be able to tell that by smell, heat, stuff like that, right? And be fairly confident that, oh, okay, my environment's not on fire. Somebody else's is. Now, some of us will be like, well, sucks to be them. And others of us will try to kind of step out and see if there's anything we can do to help. Renee says her grandma fell again, is what she thinks about when she hears that, right? So what's Renee going to do? Renee's going to get up and check on grandma, make sure grandma's okay, right? When I was growing up, my little brother had a habit of calling the fire department. Now, mind you, my dad was a cop, but my brother liked to call and report fires when there were no fires. So when I heard the fire truck coming down the road, I was like, oh God, Joe called the fire department again. No, please no. Because he liked to see the fire trucks pull up. In his ability, he didn't have the cognition to realize you're not supposed to do that, right? Helps us make sense out of a complex and constantly changing internal and external sensory environments. It does involve motor learning, right? Renee said, I'm going to use her as an example. She said, my grandma fell again. Well, why does she think that? Well, because she's had an event before where that has happened. So she's learned to make sure she checks on that. My boy who cried fire, exactly. More like the boy who cried fire truck. So all that comes into play in the way we function. So what can cause some cognitive difficulties, right? We can have attention deficits. Evidently, I have some attention deficits, right? ADD and ADHD. Now, a lot of people will say these are the same disorders, and there are some people out there that don't believe that ADD is a real disorder. I'm going to tell you, there are some flat out people out there that say ADD is fake, it's made up. What's you guys' opinion on that? Do you think it's a made up disorder? Okay, Dylan says it's real, right? Renee says, no, it's not a fake disorder, right? It's very real. Why do you think people would think that it's a made up disorder? What leads people to believe that other than stupid websites? I think it's a little overdiagnosed nowadays. They can't experience themselves, right? And they can't physically see anything's wrong. That's a really good thing, right? And thinking that someone wants attention. All those are very valid reasons. But a lot of times, I hate to say it, but docs nowadays tend to diagnose it way more than they should, right? A kid is just being a kid and is just bouncing off the walls because he had 3 lollipops and 4 chocolate bars. That does not mean he has ADD or ADHD. That means mom and dad need to stop feeding the kid candy, right? That could be a problem. But there are, exactly, college kids get diagnosed, Renee says college kids get diagnosed with it all the time, saying sell people Adderall, exactly, right? And there's some definite signs that show that, maybe before, especially in my generation, ADD was undiagnosed as much, right? Because docs didn't know as much about it. Now I think we've swung the pendulum. We're starting to get a little bit better about it. We're kind of testing people now. Now, in order to get Adderall, I don't know how much you guys know this, but in order to get those meds nowadays, it's not as easy as it used to be. A lot of times nowadays, you have to have a psych diagnosis in order to even qualify for them. So it's a lot harder to get it than it used to be. But, when you have ADD or ADHD, the difference between the two a lot is that ADD is just attention deficit disorder. You can't focus. You have a really, really hard time focusing on one task at one time. That doesn't mean you can't, right? It just means that your brain is kind of flighty, right? So when I say flighty, and it happens to me quite a bit, where I'll kind of go down little tangents that aren't necessarily the way we're going, right? What's the ADHD? What does that add to it? Yeah, hyperactivity. So now not only can I not focus, but I can't sit still. Right? So you got to think about that's got to be hard for people that suffer from it. I mean, it's not fun. And it's not fun for the families that have kids that suffer from it. The kid's not a bad kid. he just, his brain doesn't work like everyone else. And not always, and I'm not a big firm believer in giving every single kid medication for it, because some of the kids can grow out of it, right? There's techniques you can be taught and ways you can be taught to focus that can help you kind of overcome it. But some kids just do need some meds to focus. The downside is those meds are usually pretty bad for you, right? Memory impairments. We have amnesia. Amnesia means lack of memory. Amnesia, right? So anterograde amnesia. Anterograde amnesia means that your immediate recall and short-term memory are shot. So you can't process new information. So an example of anterograde amnesia would be that you show me how to do sit-to-stands. And so you're like, okay, so do you remember what I just showed you? And I'm going to say what? He's like, yeah, I'm going to say, no, I don't remember. Can you show me again? Show me what exactly? Squirrel, right? Your anterograde amnesia means you're not able to process that new information. Now, it can also just be information that hasn't encoded yet. So, you know, when you guys go to sleep at night, like all this stuff that I'm talking about right now, or some of you will go to sleep at 12:30, some of the stuff I teach you about right now will get encoded into your brain. And there are some studies that show if you want to have maximum memory recall, you should take naps, because naps help encode that stuff that you just studied. So naps are good for us, right? So it may not just be something that you just learned. It could be that, you know, your doc came in 40 minutes ago and told you to do something. You remembered it up for those 40 minutes. And then for some reason at minute 45, it's gone. That's anterograde amnesia. Retrograde, right? Retrograde meaning before. Factual recall and long-term memory are affected. Your inability to recall old information. A lot of times patients that have retrograde amnesia are going to come in and they have no recollection of what's caused their dysfunction, right? So maybe they had a TBI, they were playing football. I had one player that I remember that, you know, that played football. They got a really bad TBI. And when he came out of his TBI, because he went into a stupor and a coma and everything like that, when he came out, he thought he was 8 years old. And he was 18. He lost 10 years of his life. The last thing he had remembered was this very vivid memory of going to the lake with his father. And that was when he was 8. He lost everything up to that point. Right, it's crazy, right, Dylan? Same thing, Erica's like in the show Twin Peaks, exactly, right? It's crazy that that can happen. Now, some people over time, that retrograde amnesia will kind of alleviate and you'll get some of those memories back. But there are chances that, guess what? It doesn't. What was the, isn't there a movie with Kurt Russell about that too? Overboard. Yes, there was. Where he gets a head injury and doesn't remember everything and they bring him in. Yeah, so there's that as well, right? So amnesia is kind of wild the way it works. 51st dates, exactly. So there, it's kind of wild the way that our brain works that way. It is just amazing that something like that, something like hitting our head can cause us it. 2013, I was working for Summerlin Hospital. And I decided, my brilliance, I had a friend that came in and we went to go do free climbing up in Valley of Fire. And for those who don't know free climbing, it's pretty much the way that you get concussions, just to let you know. But we were climbing up the face of this one box canyon and the rock broke from my grip. And I probably landed, I'm going to say it's probably 20 to 30 feet till I hit the ground. And my friend Steve said it sounded like somebody hit a home run when I hit, that crack sound. And I got up and I was perfectly fine. I'm pretty sure I tucked my chin, but it didn't matter because I landed on slate or whatever that red rock is that's up there, right? Sandstone. I got up and I was fine. I actually, I had a little bit a bump on the back of my head, obviously, and I had a little cut. But for the most part, I was like, yeah, whatever. I went right back to climbing. Didn't have a single problem. I went to bed that night, woke up the next morning, and I couldn't remember my name. And I was, my wife was alive then, and she was telling me, you've got to go to work today. And I didn't remember that I had to work. I didn't even know what I did for work. And when I started I literally started freaking out and hyperventilating and everything like that. And she's like, okay, let's not pass go, not collect $200. We are going to the hospital. And I went to the hospital and I had a pretty bad swelling of the brain. And the only thing they can do at that point is what? Pretty much. Does anyone know what they do if you have a really bad concussion like that? Observe you. That's it. Unless it's so bad that, yeah, they can only monitor you. Unless it's so bad that they've got to do a craniotomy and open up your brain for the swelling to relieve, the most they can do is, take care of you and just observe you. So I was in the hospital for a couple of days. And for about 6 months after that, I had really, really bad symptoms to the point that I couldn't even work. Like in SAW 1, 2, or 3, exactly, right? I really had bad symptoms where I could not, I was off on short-term disability for about 6 months because there's no way I could be trusted with a patient. I mean, I would forget that I was doing things. There were multiple times where I would start the dishes and then it was like my ADD was on steroids. I'd start the dishes, turn around, and I'd see a comic book and I'd pick the comic book up to read, and the dishes are just sitting there soaking. Now, I know a lot of you will say that's just typical man things, but no, this was worse than normal, right? I remember once I was washing the truck, and I was standing out there, I was washing the truck, and I don't know what drew my attention, but something drew my attention. For about 20 minutes, I just stood there with the hose on, which is like a cardinal sin here in Las Vegas. Surprised that the Vegas Golden Knights didn't come and sack me or something. We didn't have them back then, right? But it's amazing how that can affect your brain. Delirium, right? Delirium is an acute confused state that includes immediate short-term, long-term confusion, agitation, disorientation, sometimes hallucinations, right? You can get delirium from a bunch of things, right? So the difference between delirium and a dementia is delirium is an acute phase of it. Dementia is a chronically confused state, right? Who's likely to get dementia? What population? The elderly, right? I know I'm heading there eventually. I just hope that I have the pleasant type dementia, right? You guys probably encountered a couple of people that had dementia on your first clinical affiliations, right? There's pretty much two types of demented patients. There's the pleasant type that is just so pleasantly confused. They don't know what's going on, but they are just happy to be there and take part in it. And then you have the other type of dementia, right? And that type of dementia is just not. Mr. Erica says, my great-grandfather would talk to the cats in the magazine, and her grandmother would cat fancy. Well, you know what? She's pleasantly confused. The kitty cats probably liked her a lot. I will take that any day versus the mean Agnory type dementia patients, right? You can also get this condition called confabulation. This is where memory gaps are filled in with fabricated stories. And these can be wild. They can have pets that they didn't have, that Erica brings up cat fancy, right? They can think they had extra kids and they never had those kids. They can think that they had kids and never had kids. It's really wild the way that this stuff can work. Your brain can just, you get these huge chunks of memory that are out with amnesia, and you fill them up with other things. Maybe you fill it up with, instead of being in the military, that's not creepy at all. Thanks, Erica. She says, should also hit on my dad, her grandson. Yeah, well, sometimes people, but here's the deal. She was pleasant, take it. We had one person, I remember back in Pennsylvania, we had this guy that got a really bad TBI that got confabulated so much that he didn't remember his military service, but he thought he served in the circus. He remembered being a circus clown. And the only thing we could figure out is he saw something that triggered that, right? And sometimes this happens. TV is kind of a culprit at this, which is why a lot of times when you have people that have TBIs, it's not always the best to give them access to television, because sometimes, they might fill in their brain with backstories of Michael Knight. Oh yeah, I remember when I worked for the Knight Industries and I drove around that talking car. What? Right? Confabulation is kind of a wild thing. And it's the brain trying to make sense of the world. You can also get bradyphrenia or tachyphrenia, right? This is a changing the process of thought and information. So Brady meaning what? And tachy meaning what? Slow and fast, right? So bradyphrenia and tachyphrenia mean you're either processing things slow or processing things fast. Both of those can be a problem, because bradyphrenia means that in order to do anything, it takes you a while to kind of get through it, right? Tachyphrenia means you'll probably act more impulsively. Perseveration is a fun one. This is the continued repetition of words, thoughts, or actions not necessarily related to the current context. Often it's inappropriate words. So these are people that get stuck on words. Now, this is different than Tourette's, which we'll talk about. People that perseverate get stuck on one word and they just repeat it over and 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 over again. Usually it's not a pleasant word. Like, it's not like kitty cat, 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 kitty cat. You don't get stuck like that. And literally that's what it is for 20 minutes. Right? Most of the times it's F-bombs. You know, it's just negative terms they get stuck on. Yeah, it could be the other word used for kitty cat. Exactly. I had a patient that got stuck on a very, very negative connotation for an African American. And he was walking through the halls, just repeating it over and over and over and over again. We decided it's probably not best to walk him through the halls because one of the other patients might take him out. Right? So this can happen, but it's what it is a lot of times it'll get stuck on a word that you use frequently, which is underlying and telling in itself, right? I can only imagine what my words would get stuck on. So I play PvP activities in the video game industry, so I can only imagine what kind of words I'd get stuck on. But yeah, so perseveration is kind of interesting. Tourette's is repetitive, stereotypical, involuntary movements and vocalizations. This is usually tics, right? When you think of somebody that's got Tourette's, everything, honestly, the best thing you can think of at that point is Tweak from South Park, right? That is a typical Tourette's type effect. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they've got, you know, they're not repeating necessarily a word. They can repeat words and they can get perseverated on something. But a lot of times it's motor tics, right? I had a patient that their faces blink, right? It's not exactly like movies make it seem, right? And sometimes it can be something very simple, like they've got to tap their hand, right? Right, and there's something to show that it ties back to OCD as well. So there's I know a person that physically shake and sometimes fall. Exactly, right? Thank you, Erica. It just, you know, and it's not like they're always swear words either. But again, like perseveration, unfortunately, it tends to be, I don't know why we tend to focus on the words that we shouldn't say, but we do. I'm pretty confident that if you look at that, it has to do with, you know, the words we tend to say more oftenly in our head. But so when we're talking about cognition, we're going to talk about, there's 5 levels of conscious, and we're going to hit this a little bit heavier when we talk about TBI. So don't totally freak about this yet. But the lowest level of consciousness is a coma. Then we have a stupor, then we have obtundation, lethargy, and full consciousness, right? I was talking to Clarice when she showed up in the room this morning, and she definitely was not in full consciousness yet. She was in a lethargic state where her brain wasn't fully processing everything I might have been saying to her, right? We often end up in that state a lot of times when we first wake up in the mornings, right? When you get down to those other 3 stages, usually there's some sort of trauma to the brain that occurred. We also have this thing called the arousal response. All of you at this point probably were laying in bed and an alarm clock went off, right? When an alarm clock went off, whether it's a clock, whether it's a watch, whether it's an iPad, whether it's an iPhone, whatever it may be, the minute that alarm went off, changes happen in your body, right? Does anybody have one of those events where the alarm clock goes off and you literally just about jump out of bed? Does anyone experience that every time their alarm clock goes off? Yeah, right? Some people, it's just the way we are. Your heart rate shoots up, your blood pressure shoots up, your rest rate shoots up. If you look at your pupils and you saw your pupils, they dilated. And sometimes you may even sweat, especially like I've had that before where I'll wake up And for whatever reason, I look over at the clock and it may be 6:45 and I see it say 8:45. Has anyone ever had that happen? Right? All of a sudden you're running around your room like a mad person, trying to grab clothes, trying to grab a shower, whatever it may be, right? I had that happen about, I want to say it was 3 weeks ago. It was on a Saturday. And for some reason, my brain had it in me that it was a Wednesday and I was missing you guys' class. So like I got up and I was running around the house. I got dressed, got ready, came into the room, brought up the Zoom meeting, and I'm sitting here at 8:30. I'm like, where are they? And it took me a little bit to realize that it was Saturday, right? That arousal response had just kicked into overgear, right? Active muscle reactivity is common, response to physical stress. So we'll test patients for their arousal response. One of the first things we'll test them is we'll walk in and talk to them. Hi, Erica, how are you doing today? And see if there's any response. If there's no response to verbal, then we'll come over and we'll give her a little shake. Hi, Erica, how you doing? We're looking for any type of response to it. Or does she withdraw from us? Does she not respond at all? Does she swing at us? Right? I'm notorious for that as well. Is if I'm going to wake up, don't touch me. Stay across the room and talk to me, because it's very likely that if you touch me, that I'm either going to throw. I've done it before where I've thrown somebody that's touched me, or I'll backhand them. I don't like being touched when I'm in my sleep for whatever reason it may be. Right? I've got a hyperactive arousal response. Shake Erica. Erica, are you awake? If we can't get Erica awake at that point, we're going to now go move on to some other levels of consciousness where we're going to cause her physical pain to see if she responds to that. So we're going to take out, a paddle and just go right across the face. No, we're not going to do that. Right? Does anyone know what sternal rub? We used to do sternal rub. We don't do sternal rub so much anymore, Erica, but that would be a big one we do. We take the knuckle and rub it up and down the sternum. And usually this is the response you get, right? Withdrawal and kind of that face. The new one we do is we pinch the nail beds. Right? Or feet, right? Yeah, you can do the feet as well. But a lot of times we're just going to take the nail bed and we're going to squeeze down on them and see if we get a response. Because that's uncomfortable. That doesn't feel good, right? Especially if you take like your nail and do it. That's not a very comfortable feeling. And somebody will usually withdraw from them. Some patients can get what's called locked-in syndrome. Did anyone encounter anybody with this? I'm just curious. It's pretty rare. The diving bell, right? Exactly. That's okay, Erica. When I think of locked-in syndrome, I think of the song from Metallica, One. That's a classic. That's actually from a story, right? Of a person in World War II. I think it's World War I. I'm sorry. That stepped on a landmine, and the person is now locked inside their brain. Right? A lot of times, it's a rare neurological disorder where they're completely paralyzed. The only thing they have is usually muscles that control the eyes. In the short story that they based the song, if you ever get a chance, One's a great song. I'm going to highly recommend it if you haven't ever heard that song. It's a fantastic song. The video is really good too. But the actual story of the soldier was he stepped on a landmine. The landmine actually blew off both of his legs and most of his arms and stuff like that. But in the process, it locked him inside his brain. And the only thing he could do is move his eyes. So he was literally trapped inside his own body. He couldn't speak, he couldn't moan, he couldn't do anything. And if you read through the story, the whole story as it goes through, they realize later on in the story that he's actually been giving them Morse code the whole time. He's been blinking a specific Morse code. And can anyone guess what he was probably blinking in Morse code? No one? No one has a guess? No one's awake? Yeah, it was blinking kill me. Because there was no chance he was ever coming out of it, right? It's so sad, but it's happened, right? And you got to think about that. That's just, I can't imagine. Some patients with schizophrenia will get paralytic schizophrenia where they're completely locked into themselves as well, right? It's really kind of scary. Just imagine waking up. Now, some of you may have this. Does anyone get sleep paralysis? Has anyone ever experienced that? Right? Sometimes, right? So sleep paralysis is that point where you wake up and your brain wakes up, but you're still in one of your REM stages, right? So in that short period of time, you can encounter everything going on around you, but you can't react to it. It's terrifying, right? And a lot of times, for whatever reason, you're still actively dreaming while you're awake. Well, that's the thing, is it's because you're still actively dreaming while you're awake, Renee. So a lot of times your creative side of your brain is still processing dreams. So you can literally have a nightmare while you're locked in your own body. So, you'd normally have that nightmare and your eyes would be closed and it just be in your brain. And you wake up and you're like, oh, that was a nightmare. It was horrible. Well, now you visualize that nightmare. And that can really be kind of terrifying. I'm not here to say it's not demons either, because I kind of fully believe in the paranormal, and I'm sure that there's some stuff that can probably cause that to happen too. But we're not going to go down the paranormal train today, because Mr. McKee will get down that train forever. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. That's just a minor form of locked-in syndrome. And there's ways. If you suffer from sleep paralysis, there are ways that you can overcome it. They can teach you. Right? That's what I was talking about. Yeah, that's what I was. Javen's with us now. Right? There are ways they can teach you to come out of sleep paralysis. So let's talk about some body schema and body image impairments. So body schema and body image impairments usually involve agnosias, right? The inability to process sensory inputs. Okay, Javen, we got you now. So one of the most common body image impairments is unilateral or hemispatial neglect. This is self-awareness deficit where the body lacks attention to be awareness of one side of the body. This happens a lot of times in strokes, where one side of the body will be paralyzed. And because the body's not processing that sensory information, you'll eventually ignore that side of your body. And that can lead to some really bad effects, because a lot of times, if they don't get help with that unilateral neglect, they will completely ignore and shut off sensory input and output to that side of the body. Right? It's kind of scary. Anacognosia, right, was a Babinski term coined in 1914. This is a self-awareness deficit where the person who suffers a disability seems unaware or denies the existence of this disability. Think about that. This is literally saying somebody's got a problem, but doesn't believe they have a problem, right? Think of somebody that's got the bilateral double amputee for below knee or above knee amputations. And the person says, no, I have legs. That's an idea of what this disorder talks about. They just aren't aware that they have a disorder. It's really kind of wild. Somatognosia or asomatognosia or body agnosia is a self-awareness deficit where the person has the inability to correctly identify or orient parts of one's body or another's body. So this is where you ask the person, can you show me your left hand? And they go like this. Now, some people, first of all, before you ask somebody like that, make sure they know the difference between their left and their right hand. It may just have to be something like, show me a hand. And they're like, right here. That would be a somatognosia, right? But if the person doesn't know their lefts from their right, and you're like, show me your left hand, and they're like, which one makes the L? Make sure your person understands your question before you ask them, right? Can you point to my shoulder? And the person points to my nose. That would be a somatognosia. Finger agnosia, the inability to distinguish and name or recognize the fingers. That's kind of wild. I've had a patient that looked at their thumb and they're like, that's not part of my hand. And they kept arguing. Their brain was saying that was a growth that occurred on their hand, and he had some other issues as well. But the growth was actually an alien implant. And it was kind of scary. We saw him in the hospital. He had some acute psychosis issues as well, obviously. He came back in about 6 months later, and what do you think happened? Yeah, he cut off his thumb. Because it wasn't his thumb. It's kind of wild the way our brain processes stuff like that. And the best part was, after he cut off his thumb, his psychosis went away. Now, was that thumb causing his psychosis? No, his thumb was not causing his psychosis, right? There's no scientific studies that show that the thumb has anything to do with processing the brain, right? But for whatever reason, that was the way his brain worked. Now, there's also the likelihood, and that was when I was leaving Pennsylvania, so I would hasten to guess that probably something else, he started having other problems with other fingers then later on in life, but I can't prove that because I don't know anything since then. I haven't talked to anybody about him. Visual agnosia is the impairment in recognizing visually presented objects, right? So this would be like you hold up somebody's cell phone to them and they're like, I don't know. Then you hold up a pen and they're like, it's a pen. And then you're like, okay, I don't know. Hold something else up, they're able to identify it. Auditory agnosia is an impairment in the recognition of audio presented stimuli. This can also be voices. Why is there just, because it's a weird, odd agnosia, Erica. For some reason, it's a really common one that happens. And I'm guessing if you probably look at it, it's probably more digit agnosia, because I've seen people that have it with the toes too. But they've typically just called it finger agnosia. It's really wild. And when you think about it, it's the most distal part of our body. So if we're likely to not recognize a part of our body, it's probably going to be that part. I'm sure there's some science behind it, right? Auditory agnosia can be really bad, especially if you don't recognize like family members' voices. Tactile or asterognosia, right, is impairment in the recognition of objects by touching them. So again, you're touching this pencil, your eyes closed, and you can feel it. You can feel the shape, you just can't name it. Prosopagnosia we talked about before, the inability to memorize or recognize faces. You can also get what's called hypomania, or a flat affect. This is a lack of facial expression and sometimes even a lack of blinking, right? So this happens sometimes with Parkinson's as well, and it can be really, really difficult for family members to deal with because, you know, grandpa's got Parkinson's and daughter brings over grandson to visit grandpa, and grandson goes running in. He's so happy to see grandpa. And grandpa's like, hi, Joey. It's so nice to see you. Yeah, I missed you too. It's been so long since I saw you. Right? That's a flat affect. They're just not showing any emotion at all, right? Their limbic system is kind of shut down. It's very, very tamped down. It can be a really problem if they actually lack blinking. Ferris Bueller, yeah, you mean the teacher from Ferris Bueller? Yeah, I mean, that would probably be a close person to a flat affect, yeah. When you encounter somebody that has flat affect, it's kind of disconcerting because you just aren't sure because they don't even show pain. They're like, ow. And their face is just this blank mask, right? And the blinking can be a problem. If they don't blink, what's going to happen to their eyes? Fall out. Well, first of all, they'll dry out. Let's go there first, right? And that can cause all kinds of visual problems then. Achesthesia is a sense of restlessness. Legs are most often affected and may result in aggression or even suicide. Some of you guys probably encounter this. Does anyone have achesthesia of the legs? What's the term we usually commonly call that? Because I have it right now. I'm sitting here bouncing because I have restless leg. Yeah, RLS, right? Now, I can attest to this, that sometimes when I get really bad restless leg, I do get aggravated. Like I can definitely feel my mood going south, and it goes south quick. Because a lot of times it happens when you're getting ready for bed, and usually it's because you have something going on tomorrow and you need to get sleep, and for whatever reason, your legs are just going, hey, that's nice that you want to sleep. Kiss off. And you're not going to get any sleep at all, right? So that can definitely cause aggression and aggravation. It has even led to suicide, especially if you don't sleep for days on end. Spatial disorders, complex perception, right-left discrimination can be a problem where they can't tell the difference from one side to the other. And again, please make sure, especially with where I'm from back in Pennsylvania, Make sure the person knew the difference between right and left before you kind of look at them and go, I think they've got right-left discrimination. They don't know their right from their left. That's just knowledge. That's not right-left discrimination problems. Figure ground discrimination. This is the ability to separate the elements of a visual field based upon contrast between light and dark. This is our ability to identify things, you know, it helps us walk. Form discrimination is the ability to separate and make distinctions of fine visual images. This allows us to focus, right? So if you have form discrimination, think of it like a camera that's out of focus. You can see things, but everything's blurry, right? Just like puddle of mud, everything's blurry. No one's gonna laugh. Okay, fine. I thought it was funny. I listen to Puddle of Mud, so shush. But form discrimination makes it really difficult to see your environment. And then vertical discrimination or vertical disorientation is the inability to tell the difference between up and down. Think about how difficult that could make your life if you couldn't tell what's up and what's down. Ooh-wee, that could be life-changing, right? Spatial relations. This is the ability to perceive two or more objects positioned in space relative to oneself and each other. This could be a problem, especially if you're trying to move around, right? And it goes with position in space, the ability to perceive an object's position in space relative to oneself. So spatial relations is the ability to look, like right now on my desk, I've got a soda can filled with water and I've got a coffee cup filled with hot tea. I know that the soda can is further away from me than the coffee cup. That's spatial relationship. Position in space is my ability to tell where they are in relation to me, right? So if I'm reaching for my coffee cup, I know that I can reach over here, get it, and take a sip. If I also have position in space problems, if I'm going to take a sip, I'm probably going to bring it up to my lips and I'm going to spill my drink on myself because I don't know where it is in space. Topographical agnosia or topographical disorientation is the inability to orient oneself in surroundings. And this can be a severe focal damage in the brain, meaning the brain is really heavily damaged. You know, the patient can't figure out where they are in the room. They have no idea how to get back to bed. And this can happen especially in an acute stroke situation where the patient is restroking and they know they need to get back to bed. They can see their bed. They know they can see it. They just don't know how to get there. They have no ability to manipulate themselves around the room and get back to bed. Depth and distance perception, we talked about a little bit. It's the ability to tell where you are in space with objects in space. All right, so let's see, we got apraxia. Let's go through apraxia and ataxia, and then we'll take a break quick. So apraxia versus ataxia, right? When you're talking about apraxia, please remember that apraxia, let me get my little annotation up here. Apraxia has a P, therefore it's for the plan. Ataxia is very taxing to complete. Those are the ways that I remembered it. If it helps you, I hope it does, but at least remember that praxia is the plan. At that point, the motor plan is interrupted. It's a motor disorder where someone has difficulty with the motor planning to perform a task or movement. So if I have apraxia, and you tell me to stand up, and you even give me the ludicrous command, you're like, stand up, and I can't. What am I going to say to you if I have apraxia? What do you think my response is going to be if I have apraxia? And you tell me, stand up. What do you think? I'm trying, okay, yep, you could, right? I'm trying usually comes with ataxia. The same thing I am. Those usually, I would say, I don't remember how, right? Or I can't. They just don't, they're like, I don't know how to do this. And so then you've got to break down the plan for them. And that's where usually we got to break it down in parts. So there are two main types. There's a third type we'll talk about, which is bucofacial, but two main types you have to know for your boards: idea motor and ideational. Idea motor is the inability to perform a task on demand despite the ability to perform that task. So idea motor apraxia. If you have idea motor apraxia, you tell me to stand up. And I'm like, I can't, I don't know how, right? It's not working. You turn around to grab a gait belt, and guess what I do? I stand up. I can't perform it on command, right? Versus ideational apraxia, meaning I have no ability to perform that, period. I can't do it on command or non-volitionally. I can't do it just randomly. So you tell me, stand up. Nope, not happening. You give me commands, you give me instructions, you show me how to do it, and I can't do it. You're going to physically have to help me stand up. You also have bucofacial apraxia. Buco meaning what? What is buco referring to? The lips and one other part. The cheek. Lips and the cheek. Right? Bucofacial apraxia involves difficulty with performing purposeful movements of the lips, tongue, cheek, larynx, and pharynx on command. So a bucofacial apraxia, the person may not be able to speak. Their vocal cords may be intact. All the nerves going to their vocal cords are intact. They just can't do it because the part of the brain shot. Right? Or you have me smile and I can't. I don't know how. I don't know what's. You're like smiling. I'm like, I'm smiling. That's not a smile. What the hell is that? Right? So bucofacial apraxia happens. If you think traditional comic book Joker, right? Not like, well, I mean, Heath Ledger Joker was kind of there, but not really. He had some other issues as well, right? But your typical comic book Joker that has a real frozen smiling face, he has a form of bucofacial apraxia. It's just he can't get out of that smile. That's where he's stuck, right? He has the inability to make other facial expressions. He's just frozen in that one facial expression. That was apraxia. Then we talk about ataxia. Ataxia, the motor plan is intact. The ability to stand up is intact. You know how to do it. You got the plan. You know that it's scoot forward, lean over, push through the legs, and stand up. You've got all that. But despite having that plan intact, you can't do it. It's either the lack of muscle control, the coordination, could be nerves, could be anything. The motor plan's intact, but the implementation of the plan is knocked out, right? A lot of times this can have to do with dyssynergia, where it's the inability to complete coordinate movements together. So maybe when you tell me to stand up, I go to lean forward, but in the process of leaning forward, for some reason, it triggers my extensors. So it pushes me backwards. That would be a dyssynergia. Or maybe you tell me to lean forward, and in leaning forward, I curl my legs way back. An abnormal coordination problem. And sensory ataxia is the presence of near normal coordination when the movement is visually observed by the patient, but marked worsening when the eyes are shut. Ooh, sensory ataxia. So this would be the police officer has you stand up and has you stand in tandem stance, where you put one foot in front of the other and you have to stand there. And you stand there perfectly fine. You're like, I got this, ha, 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 ha. And then the cop tells you to do what? Close your eyes. You knock out your vision. And then all of a sudden your vision's gone and you're like, wee, wee. I have some of that sensory ataxia, right? So if I just sit here, I can't do that so for a second. So I'm going to get myself where I'm going to challenge my balance here a little bit. So now I'm out towards the edge of my chair here. And the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to fall on the floor. So I'm out towards the edge of my chair here. Now, if I sit here and I'm going to take my hands off, so my hands are up here. I'm going to stand in I Dream a Genie stance. And if I sit here, my motor balance is pretty good, right? Would you all say that I have good motor balance or good balance grade sitting here like this? Not moving, not swaying back and forth, don't require. Now, I'm going to close my eyes, and it usually takes about 30 seconds, so we'll see. All right, that's it. I'm not falling out of the chair. Did you guys see what happened? What were you observing? Was anyone watching the video? Anyone? Anyone awake? Bueller? I'm too tiny. Yeah, no more balance, right? So what happened is when I did that, my balance started going, and usually it's to my left side, right? I start kind of tilting. And I stopped because I could really feel like kind of dizzy with it. I have a little bit of sensory ataxia because of all the traumatic brain injuries I've had, right? So I just have this idea that I know not to rely on having my eyes closed. Now that can be a problem because when else could that affect my balance? Not only when my eyes are closed, but what? When else do you lack sensory input or visual input? When your house is really what? Dark. Yeah. Right. Especially if everything's pitch black in my house. I have a little bit of problem with balance when it's pitch black in my house, which is why a lot of times if you have a patient like that, guess what they're going to put all over their house in order to help them? Night lights. Yeah. And they don't have to be bright night lights. Like for me, I have one night light in my bed or my bathroom, and that pretty much provides me with enough light that I can see around my house because I really have good night vision. Night vision is not the problem. It's the lack of sensory input for my vision that causes my balance to be a little bit out of whack. All right, so let's take a quick break here and we'll get talking about emotional dysfunctions when we come back. So I'm going to pause the recording. Pause recording. All right, so we're back and we're ringing the bell. So now we're going to talk about some emotional dysfunctions. And we're not talking what happens to you guys after you watch Old Yeller. Right? That can be emotional dysfunction as well. These are for problems that actually start occurring with your emotional system due to trauma to the brain of some sorts. One of the big ones that happens called Pseudobulbar Affect, otherwise known as emotional lability. This is uncontrolled emotions that are often in direct opposition to whatever emotion should be displayed, or emotions where none are needed. Right? So there was a commercial a few years ago about this because they had just come out with the drug to help treat this. Of course, every time that we come up with a drug, we have to have a commercial to sell that drug. But Pseudobulbar Affect would be something where, and now the drug's off the market because it had bad side effects. But Pseudobulbar Affect would be like you're at a funeral and you have hysterical laughter at the funeral. That would be a pseudobulbar affect. That at that point, your limbic system has just basically got crosswire, right? And it can happen to people without traumatic brain injuries too. Some people that just happens. Some people just laugh nervously versus, then that's a little bit of pseudobulbar affect. But a lot of times this is stuff that is inappropriate. Like I had a patient that I remember a nurse actually ended up tripping and falling coming into his room, and he just started crying uncontrollably for her falling, right? Yeah, it can happen when you hurt your own self, right? You end up, and sometimes that's just a coping mechanism too. That's the way your body's kind of learned how to deal with it. But when you have really pseudobulbar affect, it is just uncontrolled. It's not just, you're just absolutely in tears, laughter, or in tears of crying, or you get really angry, or you get really sad, or you get really happy. It's just a weird effect that happens to your emotions, right? Apathy. I feel like I live here for pretty much all my life. Apathy is just kind of a complete dissociation with reality, and it goes along with dissociation, right? Apathy, you just don't care about anything. You have a real hard time finding joy or happiness or sadness or anger. You just kind of exist. And some people are like, that'd be really nice to exist in. It's really not. You know, if you can't find any joy in life, you can't find any anger in life, you just exist in this gray. And that's not a nice place to exist, right? Your body's supposed to experience emotion. Dissociation. What does dissociation mean? Does anyone know? Anyone have a clue or an idea? T. So just, yes, when you don't feel like you're living in your own body, right? So, you know, dissociation has been known to happen when people are like cutters, because they feel like they're not in their own body. So when they cut themselves, they can feel that pain that kind of grounds them to their own body. That's happened before. Dissociation has also been known to happen when trauma happens, right? Especially sexual assault or something to that effect, where you literally dissociate yourself from that person that was assaulted, right? It's really common in children that are sexually abused, where they remember a story about a kid that was sexually abused when they were a child, and they can tell you that whole story, but in reality, they're telling the story about themselves. But they make up this friend named John that had this happen to them and blah, 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 blah. They've totally dissociated themselves to that event. Psychosis. When you hit psychosis, what is literally happening? What is the kind of the textbook definition of psychosis? Does anyone know? Psychosis is literally a split from reality, a disconnection from reality, right? When you have psychosis, you and reality aren't on speaking terms, right? And there are a lot of things that can go, yeah, right, what's real and what's not exactly, Adrian and Jared, right? You really just don't live in the same world that everyone else lives in. And the problem is people can tell you you're not living in that world. To you, they're living in some other world, right? And that can be really problematic. Depression. Do we all suffer from depression? Yeah, we all have depressive events, right? We all have, you know, our kitty cat dies, or our doggy dies, or a family member dies, or Taco Bell doesn't have the Grande Supremes today, something to that effect. We all get a little depressed every now and then, right? And Jared's like, no, you know, they're out of the Gordito Crunches or something like that. You get a little depressed. For most of us, we ride this wave of depression, right? We get a little depressed, but we're able to pull ourselves out. When we talk about somebody that actually clinically has depression, they can't swim out from that wave, right? And they may need help getting out from underneath it. And it's not something that, it's not them, it's their brain, right? Because a lot of times I love hearing people when they are talking about people that have depression, and they'll just say, well, why don't you just be happy? Has anyone ever heard that before? I can't understand why you can't just be happy. And what people don't realize is a lot of times it has nothing to do with happy or sad. It has to do with chemicals, right? It has to do with the neurotransmitters in our brain being off. A lot of times it's serotonin, maybe a little bit of dopamine, right? So it's not necessarily that you're just not happy. It's your brain's not working right. Excuse me. Hyperactivity and euphoria, right? This is the opposite spectrum of depression. This is where we talk about, when we talk about people with bipolar disorders, where they're either manic, meaning they're hyperactive and euphoric, or they're depressed. Again, this can be a brain problem. They may not want to be this hyperactive and euphoric, but they're stuck there. And this can be really depressing because something bad can happen in their life and they're happy about it. And you're like, that would be a really cool way to live life. Not really, right? Because you got to think about it. All the rest of your family, maybe you have a family member that dies. Excuse me. And that family member, when they die, everyone else is really sad. But for some reason, at that given moment, that person dying is the happiest thing that's happened in your life. And you don't want it to be. But for whatever reason, your brain just went on that tangent. That's kind of the opposite stream of depression. Other psychological disorders, schizophrenia can happen, right? Schizophrenia, right? Split brain. When you have schizophrenic breaks, right? You may have a break from reality, A lot of times schizophrenics, if you see somebody that gets schizophrenia, a lot of times they have other conditions too. They'll have stuff, excuse me, where they see or hear things that other people don't hear. And it's funny because we're starting to find a little bit of schizophrenia in patients that have Parkinson's. I don't know if any of you have any family members that have Parkinson's, but they're starting to see some family or some people that encounter Parkinson's that see and talk to people that aren't there. And there's even some commercials now, obviously, because they've developed drugs for it, that, you know, that's the way they work. Narcissism. What is narcissism? And I can tell you I have no coffee today. My ex. When you think of, yes, making things about themselves all the time. Exactly, Adrian, right? Kanye. Yeah, Kanye is a classic narcissist. So is our president. Hate to say it. He's got, I could diagnose a laundry list of disorders there, but I'm not going to, because we don't diagnose people that we don't treat. And we can't diagnose. They can be manipulative, yeah. Especially happens, you know, when they don't get their way, right? If a narcissist can't get their way, they're going to become manipulative because they want to get their way. Maybe they run for office under the birthday party. I don't know, right? So there are all kinds of things that can happen with narcissism. But that can happen due to a brain injury. You can have people that were perfectly normal before, and then they get a brain injury, and now they're a totally different person. And we talked about BPD before, borderline personality disorder. So what do we do if we have patients that have these things? Well, first of all, we have to rule out everything else as a cause of diminished function before we say it's a brain damage issue. Right? For example, with that left-right discrimination. First of all, I have to rule out that they actually know what the left and right are before we say they have left-right discrimination, right? Patient that has these, we may see the following characteristics. They may be unable to complete simple tasks. We may ask them to write their name. They can't write their name. That's a sign that something's going on in the brain. They may have difficulty, what's going on, initiating or completing a task, right? They may have problems switching from one task to another. They may have diminished capacity to locate visually or identify objects that seem obvious, right? This is a ball. I can't recognize it. Inability to follow simple one-step commands or process more complicated tasks. When we start seeing that, we start thinking, ooh, this patient's got some cognitive perceptual dysfunctions. So there are a couple of different treatment approaches. We can do the retraining approach or the transfer training approach. This is where we literally start working just on that one task that the patient is missing. Maybe they're having problems with figure ground discrimination, or they're having problems with finger agnosia. So we focus on just identifying fingers with them. It seems a little silly, but we do it. SIT we've talked about before, so sensory integration approach, right? Or sensory integration therapy. It's where we kind of use the idea that maybe it's sensory input can renormalize the CNS input. So if we help them get back to feeling normal, like actual sensory, hot, cold, touch, deep pressure, light pressure, noxious stimuli versus non-noxious stimuli, we might process the brain a little better. So maybe if patients got finger agnosia where they can't recognize their fingers, maybe we might rub different substances on those fingers to see if one of them triggers a response where like, oh yeah, I can feel that, that's my finger. That would be a sensory integrative approach. Neurofunctional approach, right? It's based on learning theory. Assumption that patients with acquired brain injuries must practice every activity in its true context to truly recover function. If I have finger agnosia, I'm just using one example as we go through this. If I have finger agnosia, and what the neurofunctional approach says, the only way I'm going to get over my finger agnosia is if I do activities with my fingers. So maybe writing, where I have to grasp a pen. Maybe picking up fine objects and relocating them, right? Manipulating objects. Anything that affect doing that stereognosis where I have to identify objects and write. That would be a functional activity and then may lead to me recovering and getting over my finger agnosia. So the rehabilitative or the functional approach is kind of a combination of all of those, right? And what this is the most commonly used one. It's basically saying that adults with brain trauma have general trouble, right? Difficulty learning dissimilar tasks. Direct practice or repetitive specific functional skills that are impaired is an efficient means of enhancing the patient's independence with those tasks. It involves the use of compensation and adaptation. So if I've got that finger agnosia, well, maybe this is the hand that I have the finger agnosia on. So I'm going to do a lot of things with this hand, right? But I'm going to do it in mirror box therapy. Because this hand I'm fine with. I know this hand, but this hand's the one I don't recognize those fingers. So I may do a mirror box therapy where I see something that's not my hand in order to normalize my function in my left hand. I'm using compensation to kind of overcome my disorder, right? Or I may do something where I do stim on this hand so I get a different sensation when I'm doing functional tasks, so I can start overcoming that weird sensation that these fingers aren't mine. There's Quadrophonic Approach, which focuses on training patients with brain injury to structure and organize information. This is built on that hierarchical theory where we build on our stuff as we go along. It usually addresses stuff like memory and high language disorder. So a lot of patients that have speech problems will be dealing with the quadrophonic approach, and that's mainly speech. You just have to know that it exists. And then dynamic interactional approach, we look at the way that the person's interplay between characteristics of the patient, characteristics of the task, and the environment. So how does the environment play into the patient's inability to recognize their fingers? If I take them somewhere else, if I take them outside, are they able to recognize their fingers? Is it only in their hospital room that they're having problems recognizing stuff? So we got to look at the way the environment works too. So when we look at PT, right, we're going to look at treating these cognitive treatments very appropriately. We're going to look at manipulating the environments, using multiple environments to carry out the training. If the patient's having problems identifying distance, such as depth perception, just training them in the room is not going to help them because their life doesn't exist in the room. You may have to get them out and take them for a ride. I've had, where I've worked in rehab facilities where we've gone for shopping trips. And you have to work with a patient walking around, getting groceries, stuff like that. Multiple environments help it out. Analyze the characteristics of the task so you can establish criteria to determine the transfer of learning occurred. So you've got to give them constant feedback and they've got to analyze themselves at the end. So how do you think you did on your therapy today? You may have them write out how they did on therapy or keep a journal so they can go back and review it. Provide training for patients, awareness of abilities, level of task and difficulty, and promote self-examination and performance. Relate that new information or skills previously learned one, right? So we may have, again, we're going to have to kind of relate those and get them, hey, yesterday, you remember when you remembered that, the chair is 5 feet away from you? Great. How does that apply to where your table is? And then education, the main one here is for the patient, but also for the family and caregivers. We are going to be big proponents of training family members. We have to get used to training family members because family members are eventually who we're going to pass these patients off on. If they're going to go home, we have to train them. In the skilled nursing facility world and even in the rehab world, we may even have to train nurses because nurses don't learn how to treat patients all the time that have cognitive difficulties. So we may have to work with them as well. Feedback is essential. We've got to be constantly giving them feedback. If we don't give them feedback, they're never going to learn, right? Managed care provide a reduction in time allocated for inpatient evaluation treatment. So when a patient has perceptual difficulties, a lot of times, because of the way that our insurance system now works, the patient may not get the most thorough evaluation, and we may miss stuff. And then we may send patients home with hazardous cognitive and perceptual deficits. If we do that, that can lead to really hazardous situations at home, right? We don't detect that a patient has some sort of a really bad depressive disorder and we send them home. That can lead to things like suicide. So we really have to be paying attention. Even though we're in a world of decreased time and decreased reimbursement, we have to give just as much attention to patients as we can before we had that, right? We have to identify and monitor potential problems as soon as possible. If you think that a patient is starting to slide down into depression, don't keep quiet about it. Let nursing know, let your PT know, right? I always, one of the things I think about, and because I've had a couple of friends that have committed suicide, is I would rather listen to somebody today than attend their funeral tomorrow. Right? I would rather take my time out of my day and lose some of my own time today to listen to them than attend a funeral tomorrow. Same idea here. You've got to be cognizant. If you think something's off, you need to speak up. Even if you are wrong, because we're going to be. I've been wrong. I know this is shocking, right? I've been wrong. I've picked up on things that I thought were problems that weren't really problems. But I've also picked on problems that could have become major problems down the line. Right? So paying attention to what you're doing with that patient can be really important. So important to provide feedback to patients. Knowledge of performance is important, meaning knowing how they did, and then knowing how those results came out. Goals, right? How are they doing towards their goals are important. So PT comes in and does the evaluation. Well, the PT's got to first of all determine if there are cognitive perceptual difficulties, right? Let's say we've got a patient that's a total knee replacement. One of the patients we have that we're going to discuss is a substance abuse patient. And that patient's had a total knee replacement. We can't ignore the substance abuse in treating a patient with a total knee replacement. That is a recipe for disaster, right? If we don't pay attention to both parts of that, it can lead to really bad problems, right? So the PT has to be aware and looking at cognitive or perceptual dysfunctions. We also have to be aware that behaviors reflect the patient's psychological and emotional status rather than cognitive or perceptual abilities. Sometimes they may not have a problem with their cognition or perception, but their emotions are in a heightened state. They're in a lot of pain, right? They may be fatigued. They may be depressed. There may be some premorbid intellectual ability difficulties, right? Maybe they're not just that smart of a person. There may be some cultural bias existing there. So PT literally has to tease these things out and go, is this a real problem with their brain, or is this a problem with their understanding? They're not quite there enough to be able to understand it. And this is why PTs have a hard job, right? We have to look at stuff. Is it a pure sensory impairment like vision and hearing? Because if the problem is the patient can't hear, that doesn't mean they have a cognitive difficulty. That just means they can't hear us. Right? Well, that person's dumb. Well, no, they're deaf. But back in the olden days, right? Back in my day, if you were deaf, if you were blind, a lot of times, and this true is a lot of times they equated those same people with being, we're going to use a negative term, which would be retarded. Right? They said, well, you're stupid because you're deaf. You're stupid because you're blind. And really what it was is back then they didn't have the same opportunities they have now. Right? We didn't have as advanced techniques as we have now for treating somebody that's deaf. If you were deaf back when I was growing up, yeah, you were usually behind a little bit in a lot of your skills because we didn't know how to teach you. We've changed, right? Back when I went through school, if we'd have a pandemic like this would have destroyed you guys' chance of ever getting your degree. We'd have no way of doing it. We couldn't do this with online stuff, right? So we've made some huge jumps. Visual impairments are the most common form of sensory loss, and we talked about a bunch of these different disorders here. I'm not going to go through them again, but if a patient's got visual impairment, they're not stupid. They just can't see right. And if they can't see right, a lot of time they're going to have other problems that go along with it, like fear and depression. So you have to be aware of that. OT, speech, and neuropsych, right? A lot of times if they have these problems, then OT and speech and neuropsych are going to have to come in and do some more cognitive and perceptual tests. In the rehab world, usually cognitive tests are performed by an OT. They have a little bit more psych training than we have. Speech will come in and perform difficulties with speech output and maybe swallowing as well. And then neurotests for neuropsych or the rehabilitative psychologist. When tests are performed and we realize that the patient's got some cognitive perceptual difficulties and we realize they are not going to get better, a lot of times we have to refer them to a rehabilitative psychologist because we have to get the patient to internalize that things are not going to get better. If they don't internalize and they don't accept it, we can't teach them compensation. Right? If the patient doesn't ever realize that they're never going to have, you know, their frontal lobe is going to be permanently damaged from now on, and they're going to have problems with decision making. So you have to think of ways differently to handle that. They're just not going to accept it. So we need to get them treated that way. There are standardized tests out there that are easy to score, administer, and stuff like that. But remember, they're norm-based, everything like that, and they only reflect where the patient is right now. So you could have somebody that's got dementia, and if you test them in the morning, they may be fantastic. But then if you test them in the afternoon, because they've got sundowners, they may not be so good. So there's the Cognifit that's out there, there's the Myers-Briggs, and then there's the famous Montreal Cognitive Assessment, right? Have you guys seen this one before? I think I talked about it once or twice before. Nope. All right, this is a quick dementia screen. This is the one Trump aced. You're exactly correct. Right, so when you look at this, there's no real way to ace this test, by the way, but that's the point. Right, so we're gonna just running through it, right? The first thing you gotta do is go, 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, 5E. You've gotta be able to do that. And then you've gotta be able to come in here and draw a cube. And then, so yeah, Mr. McKeever's cubes are not that great. Right? You got to be able to copy. Then you've got to be able to draw a clock, and you've got to draw it for the specific time it says. So 10 past 11, right? So little hand just past 11, big hand over here at 2. And then you get points of going, okay, you know what these are? Well, this is MGM, right? This is MasterCard, and this is Hump Day, right? That's what all those things are, right? You know why this one's MasterCard, right? Because it's probably charging. And then you get a, this is the fun part down here. That's the famous quote from the interview, right? Where they'll tell you, okay, so you're going to read this. I'm going to read a set of words to you. Face, velvet, church, daisy, red. Can you repeat them to me? Oh, face, velvet, church, daisy, red. Okay, can you repeat them again to me? Well, face, velvet, church, daisy, red. And then you do a recall again after 5 minutes and see if they still recall it. Right? And then you have to go down here and calculate these digits. Then you have to go down here and read the list of letters. And you must tap your hand every time you encounter an A, right? Starting at 7, or starting at 100, subtract backwards from 100 by 7. Are you able to do that? And then can they repeat these phrases? Are they fluent, right? These tests are just simply checking, are you cognitively here? There's no real way to ace this test, right? It just is what it is. You're either cognitively with it or you're not cognitively with it. But this can really give us a clue into what the patient's cognition's like, right? If they come along and they can't name something as simple as a lion, that can be a problem. So this is a really quick, easy test. And this test itself takes, you know, maybe 10 minutes to administer. Take this quick 10-minute test and it'll help us identify if the patient's got some cognitive issues. All right, that is it for the cognitive and perceptual dysfunctions lecture. Woot! I also put a copy of the Montreal Cognitive Assessment up as a PDF in case any of you wanted to give it to your family or friends to mess around with. It's a pretty easy test, but it's still very relevant to looking at things. So we're going to change gears now. So we've talked about cognition and perception. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about SOAP notes. So let me get my note screen brought up here on my tablet so I have something to write on. All right, let me change my colors. I don't like those colors. Let's go with, these colors. These colors look good. All right. So share screen. And we are going to share phone, iPad. And then screen mirroring. Zoom. Doobie-doobie-doo. Oh, there we are. All right. So we can all see my tablet here, right? Where did my chat go? There's my chat. Good. All right. So let's talk through some SOAP notes, right? So SOAP notes are made up of a couple different things, right? Obviously, we've got the S, the O, the A, and the P. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called SOAP notes. I know, it's amazing, right? So when we're talking about these, the S that you encounter, right? This is the patient's subjective. Other way to think about that S is, what did the patient say to you? So this can be a couple different things here, right? This can be something like pain. This can be that they reported last night they got a real good night's sleep. This could be that they reported last night they fell. Anything they report to you is a subjective event. You're not going to put that anywhere else, but usually you're going to put patient reports, patient states, patient said, blah, 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 blah. Anything that is a direct quote from the patient should be in quotations. So if the patient says, I fell last night, right? You're going to put patient says, quotes, I fell last night getting out of bed, end quotes. You could also report patient reports falling last night. Same concept, is just instead of using the direct quote of what they said, you're just stating that the patient said that, right? The objective, right? This is your data or what you do. In some cases, and depending upon your clinic, you may have to relate that data back to the goals. It's not always. It's a good concept to do. But in a lot of clinics, especially if you're in a clinic that might do narrative style SOAP notes, you have to directly relate everything you do, go back to a goal. So if you're doing long arc quads, why are you doing long arc quads? We'll kind of talk through that in a little bit. You may have to relate it back to those goals. The assessment is the next phase down. I like to think of this as our subjective. It's what we see. So when I say it's what we see, literally, what do we see has happened during that therapy session? Did the patient have more pain? Did the patient have less pain? Did the patient have difficulty with exercise? Did the patient have no difficulty with exercises? Did the patient achieve a goal? Did the patient not achieve a goal? Right? Maybe we're at our 3-week point and the patient's supposed to have achieved goal number 2, short-term goal number 2, and they haven't achieved it. We have to indicate that that's part of an assessment. Patient failed to achieve goal number 3. Your assessment is going to drive your plan. your plan is what now or next? Not next. That was good. Right? What's next? So what are you going to do with the patient now that they've met goal number 2? What are you going to do now that they didn't meet goal number 2? That kind of thing is important. That helps you kind of determine what you're going to do with the patient. So that is the absolute bare bones information when it comes to SOAP notes. Does everyone at least understand that part of it? Does that all make sense? Okay, so far I got a bunch of yeses. Are there any questions on this portion? We're going to do some examples as we go through here. Is that okay? All right, so I'm going to erase my board here. I really like this whiteboard thing I can do with my iPad now. This makes it a lot more readable than writing with my mouse. All right. This is so cool. How do I function without this? Let's go with this colors this time. All right. So let's talk about we're going to break each section down. So we're going to start with subjective, right? All right. So we are seeing a patient in the inpatient world, inpatient acute care. So AKA hospital. That means the patient's in a room, right? Let's say the patient is let's go 35-year-old male, status post appendectomy. So they had their appendix pulled out. Their pain when they started therapy was an 8 out of 10. Achy. And it was in the right lower quadrant. After therapy, we're at a 4 out of 10. This is before, this is after. And it was still achy. So nothing changed there. All right, the patient didn't report anything else. Patient reported pain meds. 20 minutes ago. So with just this information, we can write a subjective. Okay, so let's think through this. What kind of stuff, let's have some ideas. What kind of stuff are you going to put in your subjective out of all this information? Okay, you're going to put the pain meds, definitely. Because they told us that, right? So we got to put it in there. Pain scale's good, right? What if the patient told us that he kissed his wife goodbye this morning because she had to go to work? Is that important? Not really. Doesn't matter, right? Oh, I saw my granddaughter this morning. Fantastic, Bob. Don't care. Right? That's adorable. Great. Moving on. Right? And sometimes they'll be telling us that so they don't do therapy, right? So we have a couple things in the inpatient world we may have to also indicate, right? We may also have to put on our subjective consent. Right? So let's kind of work through one. So if I'm looking at this, I'm going to write through it, and then we'll see how I do. And it's been a while since I wrote an inpatient note. So patient received therapy in room today. Oop, let's get my eraser. I'm just trying to erase it with an actual eraser. That was good. Patient gave consent to TX. Reports pain in right lower Now, I just put patient reports pain in right lower quadrant. Do I have to indicate abdominal quadrant? I could, but it's understood in the medical field, if I say the right lower quadrant, I'm talking about the lower quadrant of the abdomen. Very rarely anywhere else are we talking about another quadrant. So I could put abdomen. That's one where I don't necessarily have to indicate that specific, right? But if I really wanted to be specific, I absolutely could. So I'm not saying you're wrong, Kelly. I'm just saying that it's kind of understood that if I say right lower quadrant, I'm talking about the abdomen, right? And that's pretty clear with an appendectomy. That's where I'm going to have my problem. So before TX, I was 8 out of 10. And after TX, 4 out of 10. Achy. Patient. So I could do the pain meds differently. I could say patient states, I had my pain meds 20 minutes ago. I could also just report, we'll talk about, yes, we're going to talk about how the pain relates in assessment with this patient. Absolutely. Just give me a second, Kelly. The difference is in assessment, there's not going to be any numbers, and we'll talk about why. All right. Do I have to report patient is a 35-year-old male, status post-appendectomy? Why not? You're right, Adrian. You're exactly correct. No, I don't. But why don't I have to report it? He didn't say it. The other thing is, where is that at? It's in the chart. Yeah, right. You don't. If you have a patient that's a total knee replacement, you don't have to put patient is a left total knee replacement. That's a given. That's why they're coming to therapy, right? Dylan, some clinics will do that. So Dylan made an excellent report. He said here that's in his clinic, his CI says the subjective has to be in all non-medical jargon. Absolutely, could be. And that's going to be one of those clinic by clinic bases. It's not a bad habit to get into, Dylan. I'll give it that. I know I've got some bad habits with mine. That would not be a bad habit to get into, is making sure that your subjective is all from the patient's perspective. So you might have to write out right? You might have to say right lower belly, right? You might have to say, instead of TX, you might have to put treatment. So absolutely, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I've never seen hard rules on that, but it does make sense that somebody could say that. So it just depends. And that's going to be a clinic by clinic basis. I've seen this abbreviation frequently. Have you guys seen that abbreviation? Anyone seen that in their clinics? Right? Verbal informed consent. I have not seen anywhere where that is an approved abbreviation yet. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be in the future, but in almost every medical textbook I've seen, so Dr. O'Neill uses it, okay. I haven't seen yet a book where it states that that is a legitimate abbreviation. Now, if your clinic uses that and it's a consistent abbreviation for your clinic, that is okay, right? So maybe in the hospital Dr. O'Neill worked in, that was a consistent abbreviation. If that's the case, that's okay, right? But if you go to the next hospital and they're like, hey, I have no idea what that abbreviation is, you need to be sure to change it. Does that make sense? This is where it's going to come in clinic by clinic, clinician by clinician. So you have to be aware of that, and that's going to take time. Well, how do you go to a new clinic? How do you know what to put in your notes? What do you think is a good way of figuring that out? Yeah, ask to see previous notes. Go look at some previous notes. One of the clinics I worked at, they were really kind of cantankerous about the way you write notes. That was my final clinic rotation. And it was a low volume, all right, Jairus says his was too, right? It was a low volume clinic. So they didn't have a ton of, they didn't see a ton of patients. They were much more of a manual therapy clinic where they spent a lot of one-on-one time with the patient, which was fantastic. I loved that about this clinic because that meant patients got better most of the times faster, because we know if we spend more one-on-one time with patients, the patients are going to get better, right? So that was fantastic. But that also meant that we had some downtime. And so what I did as a student was when I had that downtime, I would go and I'd pull charts and I'd read the way other people wrote notes because I didn't want to just read the way my CI wrote notes. Because if I just read the way my CI wrote notes, I'm going to talk about it in a second, Irene. This is actually leading to that. It's a great question. If I read the way that if I just wrote the way CI wrote my CI wrote notes, and then maybe my CI is out for 3 days and I'm with a new person taking over, that person may use totally different lingo. And they may say everything I just wrote is wrong. So Dr. Vreskin, I know one of her kind of pet peeves is TX. To me, TX is treatment. Every clinic I've been in, TX means treatment. But in some rare occasions, TX can mean traction. So if they use TX for traction, that means we can't use it for treatment. Right? And one of the clinics Dr. Vreskin worked in, they use TX for traction. So they don't use TX for treatment. I've seen where I put prescription here, right? Because RX to me, so let me get another color here. RX to me equals meds. I've seen where RX to some people means treatment. That's not a real approved definition that I've seen. But if your clinic uses that way, then you've got to be consistent with your clinic. So this is where you've got to kind of pay attention to what your clinic says is appropriate and what your clinic says is not appropriate. Usually it's going to come from the clinic manager or the office manager, but it may just come from your CI. And I've had it where I've seen clinicians where I'll be arguing certain points with my students and somebody across the way in my office will be like, yeah, but I don't do it that way, right? So you have to be paying attention. The one thing you want to make sure of is no matter what you're writing and how you're writing it, it is consistent. Right. And a lot of clinics use TX for treatment. It just is. But then some clinics just don't. And that's just one of those where you have to pay attention to what they say. If they say it's treatment, if this is not treatment, great. Then I'm going to take this. And while I'm in that clinic, I am wiping that out of my brain. Right? I'm just going to delete it from my brain. Understand on your boards, TX typically stands for treatment. So if you see something on your boards, TX is not going to mean traction. It's going to mean treatment. So just be aware of that. We all do require different things in our SOAP note. I know, it is. We all will require different things in our SOAP notes. So my SOAP notes will be slightly different than Dr. Vreskin's. But that's a good thing because you're going to encounter areas where, like Dylan said, where all this has to be very, very non-medical. for subjective. It happens. What you have to be able to do is be able to be adaptable to it. So let's see some other things that could be recorded. What if the patient reports the doctor said they're going to be discharged later today? Would that be important to put in the subjective? Yep. Because that's going to drive part of your plan. Right? What's that going to change about your plan? Either HEP, right? The other thing is you're going to have to go notify the PT, because what's the PT going to have to do? Yeah, the re-eval, the DC eval, right? The discharge eval, exactly. So we may have to say, hold on a minute. We may even have to say at that point, hold on a minute, let me call the PT, or let me go let the PT know you're being discharged later today, and see if there's anything they want me to get for them or do for you, right? But you're going to put that as subjective. The patient put it there, right? What if the patient says, I have no help at home? Yeah, that's important to document, right? That's definitely, especially for case management. You write that in. What if the patient says, I'm feeling depressed today? I'd be careful with that one. So that's going to be one where I have to be, if their affect matches what they're saying, then yeah, I'm going to write it in. It is a common occurrence. Absolutely. Right. You could put it in quotation marks just so that's what the patient said. Right. That'd probably be the best idea if you're going to put it in subjective. Right. But I would note in your assessment if you see any signs of that depression. Right. Talk to them, Adrian. See if they're really depressed, or if it's just they're in a funk. Right? Because everyone gets in a funk. The hospital is not a fun place to wake up every morning. It isn't, if you even get to sleep, or it could just be overwhelmed. So get a feel for them. I've had patients say, I really feel depressed today. And by the time I get them up, they're joking, laughing, having a good time. They weren't really depressed. They were just overwhelmed. You're exactly right, Kelly, right? So I may still indicate patient reports feeling depressed today, or patient reports, I feel depressed today. That's in there in case we encounter something down the road where we might have to use it, right? Patient, you're in there and you're coming to see the patient, you get all this information, and he's like, hey, you didn't say hi to Bob. And you're like, wait, what? Bob, the guy over there in the corner. And you look over in the corner and there's no one there. Yep. Right? I'm going to pay attention through the rest of the session to see if he's seeing other than one. Exactly, right? That may be time before I get the patient up. I might go talk to the nurse. Be like, oh, crap, I forgot my pen. Hold on 1 second, right? I'll be right back. And you go out to the nurse or the nursing assistant and say, hey, he's seeing things. And the nursing assistant may be like, yeah, he had his pain meds. It's normal. Okay, great. I may still document it, right? Because that's definitely a visual hallucination. And visual hallucinations mean something could be focally wrong with them. They could be stroking for all we know. So I would put that, usually at that point, so I'm trying to think of where I would document that best. If the patient gave me a direct quote I could use, hey, you didn't say hi to Bob. I could put patient says, hey, you didn't say hi to Bob, and point it to empty corner. That's all I have to put. I don't have to indicate that they're having hallucinations, right? Because at that point, that pretty much tells you the patient's having hallucination, right? I don't have to diagnose anything. I don't have to do anything. If he's telling me to talk to somebody in the corner that's not there, we know that's a hallucination. And then I may indicate in my assessment how many times a patient had hallucinations throughout that whole visit. Patient had multiple hallucinations. Patient had one hallucination. Does that make sense? So there are times where this stuff gets weird, right? For the most part, though, your evals, your subjective is just going to be, hey, you know, I usually put in, if I'm in the hospital, how they're received, right? So if I'm down in the therapy gym and my tech brings my patient down, patient received in wheelchair in therapy gym today. Now, you don't have to do that. I do that because that helps cover where I treated them. You know, for example, one time I had this patient way back in the days that I was working the weekend with him. And then I go to my outpatient clinic because I was working outpatient for the week. And I get a call from my boss in the inpatient clinic. And she's like, hey, Mark over here in, or do you remember the patient in room 302 is what she said. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, Mark, you know, this is diagnosis, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, yeah, he says he didn't see you on Sunday. And you billed for it. And his wife didn't remember seeing you. Oh, well, that seemed odd, right? Because that could mean that I'm billing fraudulently. And that's what they were really checking on was, did I bill fraudulently? Now, I'm not a person known for fraudulent billing. So my boss was kind of like, hey, what's going on here? So I said, oh no, if you look at my notes, I saw him on Saturday in his room, but on Sunday, they had taken him down for an x-ray and I grabbed him from x-ray and saw him in the gym. That's why his wife never saw me, because he was seen in the gym. All she had assumed was he went to x-ray and stayed in x-ray that whole time and then came back from x-ray. So she didn't know that he had received his therapy. And unfortunately for him, he was looped out on pain medications, so he wasn't a very good historian. Right? So a good note can defend you, is what I'm saying. Does that kind of help with subjective? Subjective, I think, is probably the easiest part of your SOAP note. Would you agree? Yeah, subjective is kind of the easiest part. To me, objective and assessment are probably the two hardest. Are we doing okay? Do we need a break or can we keep going? Break, please. Okay, so let's take a break here. So let me stop sharing. All right, so let's take a 10-minute break. We'll pause here. So pause the recording. We'll come back. Pause. All right, so we're going to resume recording now, and we're going to resume with the objective. All right, so with the objective portion of your notes, this is what you performed. So remember, we had a patient that was, I forget, I think I said 45 years old, 35 years old, whatever it is, 45-year-old male, and he had an appendectomy. And we know he's in the hospital. I'm just trying to take up as little room on my screen as possible. That doesn't really matter. That just gives us this. So there's all kinds of different ways to write out your objective. When I write out my objective, I cluster it. And what I mean by clustering it is I'll break my objective down into sections. So I'll have transfers. I'll have gait. I'll have therex. Now, you could also just write this all out as one separate total, write out. I don't like to do that. I like to break mine down based upon what I'm doing. It helps me keep things in my head. So if this patient is in the hospital, he's probably in his bed when I go see them. So what kind of transfers am I going to be looking at with this patient? Okay, maybe bed to wheelchair, sit to stand, I definitely got. Supine to sit. Yeah, that's the one we forget about a lot, right? Bed mobility and supine to sit are one of the ones we forget about a lot. So I'm going to look at this and go, okay, well, do I have to assess his bed mobility? So if I look at the eval and it says bed mobility independent, do I really have to indicate bed mobility on my SOAP note? if on the eval it says bed mobility, yeah, not really, unless there's a change. If maybe now his bed mobility, he is a mod assist. But if he's pretty much scooting around in bed okay, not really that big of a deal. But let's say I'm going to go supine to sit. Now, depending upon what your documentation system are, you may be able to just click on supine to sit. You may have to type it out. I'm old school. I have a habit of writing my notes, so I may put this just generally written in my notes that they're there. But when I write supine to sit, I usually write this little icon in here. What that means is I went both ways. So I went from supine to sit, but I also then eventually at the end did what? Sit to supine, right? So we went both ways. So maybe I might put the number of reps. So I only did 1 rep of this, times 1 rep. So that means he got up out of bed and he eventually went back to bed, right? What else do I need to indicate on that? The posture is going to be more of an assessment. We'll talk about that in a bit. Assist level, there's the major one, right? I need to indicate how much help did he need. Patient's had a appendectomy. How much help do you think he's going to need? Think he's going to need a little bit getting from supine to sit? Yeah, he may be max the mod. He may be min if he's got some good core. I'm probably going to bet, more than likely, especially if he's in the first day or two, it's probably going to be a mod assist, right? So we'll say he's a mod assist. So he's mod A. What else do we have to include about that mod A? So we can't just put mod A. We also have to put what? How many people? Yeah. So I'm the only one in the room, so it's times 1. What if instead he only needed the edge of the bed? So he needed the bed rails to sit up. What would we call that? That he could sit up out of bed. He just had to pull himself up with the bed rails. I didn't have to help him at all. Mod I, exactly. Yeah, so independent with assistive device, or mod I is the term for it as well, right? So modified independent, meaning he's able to get up on his own, but he needed an assistive device. So mod I is typically what you're going to see. Now, if he's mod I, do I have to put the number of people assisting him? I always love this when I see independent times 1. Wait, what? Yeah, if you're independent, you don't need any help. What if I'm supervising? Would I want to put how many people are supervising? Standby assistant, or, yeah, then I still want to put the times 1 because that tells me how many people are in the room with him, right? But mod I, he's doing it on his own. He's doing it on his own. I don't have to put that I was there, right? If you're a mod I or an independent, a lot of times that means we're going to discharge that goal, right? So we got supine to sit. I also saw somebody said sit to stand, right? And let's say we also worked on bed to chair transfers. Because maybe he's not going to stand every single time, but we tell him, look, you need to get out of the bed and get out to the chair. So we may just do a bed to chair, right? And that we may indicate what type of bed to chair transfer. But let's say sit to stand. Actually, I want to erase this a little bit here because I want to give myself a little bit more room. So that erased some of sit to stand. That's not good. All right, so let's say we did sit to stand. Now we're going to need some more information here. Right? We need to figure out what type of sit to stand transfer. Right? What assistance level? So if he's doing sit to stand, do you think that's going to be better than his bed mobility? What do you think? Yeah, probably. You don't require as much core activity to stand up. Right? Now your core activity is important for balance and stuff like that, which I may put down here. I may come down here and go We may add an extra section down here. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, so let's just say he was a minicist. Oops, we didn't put how many times. So maybe we did, let's say we worked on it 5 times. And he was a minicist times 1. We also have to indicate what he stood up to. Does that make sense? Did he stand up to an assistive device? Did he stand up to us? Did he stand up to no assistive device? So let's say this patient's fairly healthy and they stood up to no AD. I'm going to run out of space over here, but no AD. So he was able to stand up, no AD. Great. We got how many times we practiced sit to stand, right? Now maybe we practice bed to chair transfers. Bed to chair, we may add a little bit more to it. So bed to chair, and say we worked it 5 times, right? Now, because we have sit to stand up at the top, do we have to put that the bed to chair transfer was a sit to stand? What do you think? So what I'm saying is, because we already have this up here, do we have to put down here that the transfer to the chair was a sit to stand? No, because we've already indicated they match up, right? If you see sit to stand times 5, bed to chair times 5, you pretty much realize what you were doing was standing the patient up, shimmy, 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 sit down. Stand up, shimmy, 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 sit down. Does that make sense? So you don't necessarily need to put the bed to chair transfer was a sit to stand transfer. You could have just combined them too. You could have put bed to chair, sit to stand transfers times 5. So we'll say it was minicist for that. Right, and again, no AD. All right, so let's talk about gait. Should we walk every patient in the hospital? Come on, good patient. Come on, let's go for a walk. Come on, good patient. Not if they're not appropriate, right? But most patients we see, it's a really, really good idea to get them up and walking, even if it's nothing more than around their bed. Because we know from experience, walking is the best way to get them to go home. If they don't walk, they're not going home. Because how can I send somebody home if they can't walk? Does that make sense? So we're going to do some gait with this patient. Now, are you going to use an assistive device with this patient? Let's say you're a new clinician. First time seeing this patient. Gait belt, definitely, right? Good. I may even put that, I may even put in the, and sometimes I've done this before in my SOAP note, I may say patient received in room, applied gait belt at beginning of session. Then it's in my note. All right? So, gait. How far did this patient walk? What do you think? How far did we walk this guy? Do we take him for a good long walk? Do we take him for a short walk? All right, so he's only done 20 feet. All right, so Adrian says he's kind of weak. So patient ambulated. Ambulated is fancy word for walk. Now, I always do that little squiggly line. What does that little squiggly line mean? Approximately, right? Yeah, because were we ever 100% sure how far this patient walked? I've seen this. I had a clinician once that was in my hospital that would put patient ambulated 23.7 feet today. And I was like, how do you do this? Well, he took one of those little wheelers that you use in like surveying that. Yes, he kept one of those with him. And every time he walked the patient, he would I mean, God love him. He was really accurate. But it was funny to watch him when he had a patient with lots of stuff, like lots of lines and cables. And he would have the little machine, the little wheel thing attached to the IV pole. It's kind of amusing. It's a good idea. You're exactly right, Kelly. But it was still kind of, it was amusing to me, right? It made me laugh when I'm like, he's like, oh, and he's like, well, this is how you do it. And he pulls literally out of his little pack. He's got this little fold up collapsible wheel thing. And I'm like, okay. Right? I can't dispute it at that point. He's pretty accurate. Now, let's say I put 20 foot times 1. What does that mean? 20 foot times 1. Yeah. So let's say instead, I'm going to change this. Let's say he did 20 foot times 2. What does 20 foot times 2 mean to you? So yeah, total of 40 feet. You're exactly right. 2 reps. There's the key thing. Not necessarily down and back. What it literally means is the patient did 20 feet. They took a rest. They took a break. Exactly, Kaylee. They took a break and then completed the 20 feet. Now, it could be down and back, right? So you could be that the patient walked to the bathroom 20 feet, sat down on the toilet, was on the toilet for a few minutes, got a break, and then walked 20 feet back to the bed. That would be 20 foot times 2. Let's say I got the patient up and we walked out to the nurse's station, and the nurse's station is 20 feet away from his bed. But we walked out to the nurse's station and back. What would that be? Without a break. That would be 40 foot times 1. He had no stops, unless he stopped for a break. If he stopped at the nurse's station, kind of leaning on the nurse's station, okay, give me a few minutes. Then yes, then it would be 20 times 2. But if he just walked out and back, it's a 40 foot walk. That's the major difference when you're doing gait. When you're doing gait, if they stop and break, that is a point where you're going to delineate. Now it's times 2, times 3, right? If you're following with the wheelchair, right? Maybe they walk 20 feet, have to sit down, and then get up and walk another 20 feet, have to sit down, and have to get up and walk another 20 feet, and then sit down. You could get, I've had it where I've walked 40 feet times 6, where each time the patient sat down, I had to give them a break. But hey, they were willing to get up and keep walking another 40 feet. I'll take all the walking they'll give me, because that's important. I will document if I take them to the bathroom. I'm going to document in my transfers if they sit down and stand up to the toilet, because that's another transfer, isn't it? Is that another transfer? Sitting down to the toilet and standing up? Yep, it's another transfer I can document. Let's say, real quick, just let's say that we walked 20 foot times 2, and it was to the bathroom. And while we're in the bathroom, the patient brushes his teeth. Can I bill for that? What can I use it as? Static balance, exactly. ADLs, if the hospital allows PT to bill for ADLs, Michelle. Because some hospitals won't let PT bill for ADLs. They'll say that's an OT only skill. But there's nothing that says I can't use it as static balance, right? Static standing balance or static surface balance with dynamic movement. Because if he's brushing his teeth, he's doing movement, right? Sure. Or if I'm brushing his teeth, he's still doing static balance. So I can still bill for that, right? So a lot of stuff you wouldn't think of, you can bill for. Let's say the patient, I put the patient on a bedpan, because I know all of you are looking forward to putting a patient on a bedpan, right? What are bedpans used for? Well, they're used to poop and pee in when they can't get out of bed. You gotta slide it under them and let them just let loose. How can I bill for that? What technically are the bed mobility? Yeah, exactly. Right, so we can bill for most activities, even if we can't do ADL type stuff. All right, so patient amputated 20 foot times 2. I need to put my assistive device. What assistive device did we use? Did we use any assistive device with this guy with the walking? What do you think? What if we use, let's say we use a rolling walker. So a front wheel walker. Why might we use front wheel walker with this patient? He may not need it for balance, but why might we use it? What can the front wheel walker help us promote? Standing upright. Right? I can raise that walker up where he kind of has to stand upright to hold on to it. So I may not be using that walker for balance, but I may be using it to promote positive posture. Right? And that's going to be going in the assessment. Maybe I don't use it and I just use standing up and I'm constantly talking to him. All right, Bob, stand up. All right, Bob, stand up. All right, Bob, stand up. Right? What else do I have to indicate in my walking here? My gait. Same thing we indicated up in cueing, right? We also have, before we get to cueing, we also have to indicate our assist level. Right? So let's say we did contact guard. What does contact guard mean again? Yeah, your hands on the patient, but not on the what? Contact guard is your hands on the patient, but it's specifically not on the gait belt. According to your boards, as soon as you get a hold of that gait belt, you are a min assist. As soon as, if you've got a hold and you've got that grip on that gait belt, you are a min assist. And if you think about it, it does kind of make sense, right? If you have your hand on that gait belt, are you likely to be giving him some balance help? Yeah, right? So contact guard would be something where your hand is just kind of resting on them. Now, you could have your hand on their lower back near the gait belt, ready to grab a hold of that gait belt. But you're not physically gripping onto that gait belt. Does that make sense? So you've got your hand, right? Your hand's down here on their low back. And maybe you're using it for some tactile cueing to stand upright. That's not providing him assistance for walking. That's just there to give him assistance. So we had some cueing, right? What kind of cueing might we have given this patient? Well, let's say we had no tactile cueing, but we had to verbally cue him to stand up. So I'm going to document 3 verbal cues for upright posture. I could also put maybe to look up or look ahead. That could be another thing I could cue them, right? What else? What other kind of cues could I give him while he's walking? What are some other common cues? Because if you don't provide cueing, you don't provide them any kind of feedback, and you're walking them, are you really doing them any service? If you're just walking down the hallway in silence with your patient, not really, right? So be giving them constant cues. All right, head up, chin up, right? Back nice and tall. You could also be saying, okay, remember, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe, right? If I've got a patient that's maybe a total knee replacement. So any of those cues I can document. Now, if I'm contact guard and I have to constantly kind of give him a little bit of a push to kind of keep him upright, that changes from a verbal cue to a what? Tactile cue, right? If I constantly have to Gibbs slap him in the back of the head to keep his head up, that's a tactile cue. Don't do that. I'm joking, right? But I have had to go like this to patients. Head up. Look ahead. Sorry, this is still better than writing with a mouse. I'm sorry. Look ahead. Because which way are patients typically going to be looking? down. Yeah, and we all do it. Watch yourself next time you go and you're going for a walk or a run. Pay attention to yourself. Watch how much you actually look down. In the martial arts, and like, I don't know if Erica encountered this as well, but that was one of the big things when I first started in the martial arts, was I was constantly looking down. And it ended up me getting clocked more often than not. Because if I'm looking down, I'm not paying attention to what the person's doing in front of me and sparring, and whap, I get smacked upside the head. Right? And my instructor used to do that to me all the time because we used to spar with the black belts, and he'd be like, okay, if you don't look up, boom, right in the forehead, boom, right in the forehead, boom, right in the forehead. After a while, I got the hint, I got to look up so I don't get smacked in the forehead anymore. Right? Don't do that to your patients. Don't literally like, oh, look, train. I've done that with kids before, though, where I've taken a feather, and I'll joke with them if they're looking down, be like, tickle their forehead. Oops, you ran into a ostrich because you weren't paying attention. Right? Or we're walking, I'm like, oh, look, you're skiing down the slaloms. Oh, you hit a tree because you didn't look up and see the tree. So you can have fun with it, right? I joke a lot of times with my patients when I'm walking them. I'll specifically, if I get a patient who's constantly looking down, I'm like, hey, Bob, come on. If there was any money down there, I would have already picked it up. There's no money down there. There's no need to look down there. Right? That gives you a chuckle. That gives them a little chuckle, and it kind of sticks in their head. Right? So any type of fun you can have while you're doing it helps out. You can also tell them to fixate on something down the hallway. Right? Head up, I want you to look at that orange curtain down the hallway. And use your peripheral vision for everything else. Okay, I'm focusing. Is the hallway getting close, right? So there are things you can do for that. So this patient had a fairly good walk. 20 feet times, that's not actually a long walk, but they did okay with us, right? Contact guard, not bad. Probably want to walk them a little bit more, but. All right, Therex. Because ultimately, that's one of our major jobs is exercise. Are we going to want to do crunches with this guy? Probably not. That's probably going to be a contraindication at this point. He's got a surgical site, right? What kind of stuff might we do with this patient? Remember, we're in the inpatient world. So what kind of stuff could we do? Could we do back extension exercises? What would that help promote? If I have the patient put his hands on his hips and kind of extend back, what's that going to help promote? It's going to help promote positive posture, right? Exactly, Adrian. Right? It's going to help him promote that upright posture, which he's supposed to have when he's walking, which he's not doing, right? What about scap retracts? Right? I have him doing stuff like this. Does that help posture as well? Yeah, right? Even something, think about this. So sit with your head down, right? Just slightly down. And then do a chin tuck and bring your head back. What happens to your posture? It goes upright. Right? So something as simple as a chin tuck can help with posture. It doesn't have to be hard, aggressive exercises. You don't have to put them on the back extension machine with 240 pounds. Something as simple as that promotes posture, right? Even something as simple as looking up. That's an exercise we can do. Now, does that stress his surgical site? Probably not, because again, if you don't know too much about appendectomies, they're going to be a really small kind of tiny incision. We just don't want to stress those muscles until that's kind of healed. So we don't want to tighten these muscles. Everything else pretty much okay. Now, do we want him like doing back extension where he's like bending over backwards and touching the floor behind him? Probably not. That's going to pop a stitch. Right? But at least getting upright. What other stuff could we do with this guy? What did you guys just learn about in Dr. Oreskin's class? Straight leg raises we could, right? Yep, absolutely we could do SLRs. What did you guys just learn about? Yes, the active cycle of breathing. You do bike for a warm-up. Any of that is a valid exercise, right? Now, I'm just going to say, let's say we did a UBE, and we did the UBE draw cab. Backwards for 5 minutes. Level 3. So UBE is what? What does UBE stand for? Upper body arm bike, right? Upper body ergometer, right? So we put him on and we had him doing it backwards for 5 minutes at a level 3. Level 3 is your resistance level. Why would we have him do it backwards? Think about what I've been preaching this whole time. It may be harder, but let's also think about it. If I'm going backwards, think what my posture's like. Yeah, right? If I'm going forwards, I'm this way, right? Backwards, I've got to get posture up. So now I'm doing my posture. 5 minutes, this is loads of fun. So let's say we did UBE, straight leg raises. Let's say we did 3 sets of 10 with a 1 pound weight. And because Kelly wanted to do straight leg raises, I like that. Let's just say we'll do chin tucks for whatever reason. And again, the exercises are going to be based upon the eval, right? I'm just putting a couple exercises down here. And what else can we do? We'll do upright rows. Two times 10, yellow. All right. So I put a couple exercises here. We're going to talk about something else to add to these exercises in a bit. So we did straight leg raises, 3 times 10. Uh-oh, I forgot something on that straight leg raise. What did I forget? I got sets and reps to 3 times 10. Which leg, right? Oh, that's not good. Let's say he did bilaterally. So he did 60 reps for us. Yeah, right? Now we may have assistance if he needs assistance. If it doesn't have assistance with exercises, we assume that he did his exercises without assistance. Maybe he needed mod assistance. We're going to indicate that then. Chin tucks 3 times 10. We only have one chin. We don't have to indicate which chin we have to do it with. I mean, some people do have multiple chins. In that case, you might say all chins, chin tuck. No, don't put that. All 3 chins, chin tucks 3 times 10. Right? We're not going to indicate that. There's only one chin tuck we're going to do. Upright rows. If we do upright rows, we are assuming that we're doing both arms. Because if you're not doing both arms, it's not going to be an upright row. It's going to be a scapular retraction with one side. Right? So upright rows is one we're grabbing a hold of the TheraBand and we're doing this. Right? You did it with the yellow TheraBand, but if you look over there, I've got an asterisk beside it. What does that indicate? What does the asterisk indicate, or the star, for those who don't know what an asterisk is? It means pain. Yeah, with pain is typically what an asterisk means. So if you see a flow sheet, and we're going to go over a flow sheet, review a flow sheet as well again. But you see a flow sheet and you see an asterisk beside an item, it typically means that item caused the patient pain. Well, why would upright rows cause a patient pain if they've got an abdominal surgery? Well, think about it. If I'm pulling too hard, could I stress out that surgical site a little bit in my belly? Yeah, right? So if upright rows with the yellow TheraBand cause me pain, What am I likely to do next session? What are a couple things I could do? Lower reps. That'd probably be what I do with this patient. Yeah. Or maybe no resistance. Exactly, Anthony. Maybe I just take out the TheraBand altogether and we'll just do upright rows in the air. Right? And just use my arms as kind of the weight of my arms as my resistance. Right? I could do either of those. If I was, let's say I was doing blue TheraBand instead of yellow TheraBand, I could back down the TheraBand. Right? I could go down to, I'd probably go down to red and see if red helps. Right? I could go down to manual resistance too, couldn't I? I could have him hold my hands and pull me. Because then what I could do is tell if it's the resistance that's causing it or if it's just the activity. Right? Because if I go to manual resistance and I'm just doing I don't want to talk to you, go away. And I'm just doing gentle and it's still causing him pain. It's not the resistance, it's the exercise. And I may have to discontinue the exercise. Erase my unhappy smiley face. All right. So we've got all this gunk here and let's, I don't know, we'll say we did some balance work. What do we do? We did, let's just say we did tandem stance. That's a back. We did one balance activity. So we did tandem stance, right lower extremity back. You would put breathing under thorax. Absolutely, Sukana. If we did ACB, we would put what phases of the ACB we did. So I may do a separate section and I may have a section that I could put it under thorax. I could even create, if only thing I did with him was breathing, Sukana, I could just put ACB and I could do phase 1, phase 2. Right? I could put it, if I was doing that active cycle of breathing. I'm going to get talked into tying those to goals in a second here. But in this case, I did tandem stance, right leg back, right? So tandem stance is what? One foot in front of the other. All right? It's also known as Romberg stance. And then there's also sharpened Romberg or sharpened tandem. So let me do a horrible drawing here. Here's my left foot. Let's see. Big toe. 1, 2, 3. There's my 5 toes. There's my left foot. If I'm in tandem, big toe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's my right foot. If I'm in tandem, my legs are kind of like that. It's like doing a sobriety test. Yeah, but I want to cover the difference between tandem and sharpened tandem. So tandem, there's a little bit of space between them. If I have sharpened tandem, now my feet are right together or my toes. It is Romberg. You're exactly right. Romberg and sharpened Romberg, right? Same thing as tandem, sharpened tandem. It depends upon what your clinics use. I tend to use tandem more than I use Romberg because I use Romberg as a test. So if you're in sharpened stance, that means your toes and your heels are together. Does that make sense? Versus if you're just in tandem, they're kind of offset from each other. That's the difference kind of there. So we did just regular tandem stance. Right leg back. We probably picked right leg because it's probably his dominant leg. Not for any reason, right? What does the EO mean? EO. Has nothing to do with Eeyore. Eyes open. There we go. Good. Right? Eyes open 3 times 30 seconds. We may have to put assist levels if you required assist levels. If you require, what if I put 3 times 30 and I put this? HHA times 1. What does that mean? So we did 3 seconds, 3 sets of 30 seconds, right? What does the HHA times 1 mean? Handheld assist, and how many hands did he need? 1, right? If I say HHA times 2, that means he's got bilateral assistance, right? That's where he's standing up and he's leaning with both his hands on something. Does that make sense? And remember, if he has to put his hands down, he can never be a good balance grade, right? So we're going to leave him. He needed handheld assist times 1. So he just had one hand down on the bed probably while he was doing his exercises. Just, he's a little unstable. He probably has a little bit of pain meds in him. Now, in certain clinics, this would not be enough, because all we did here was put what we did with the patient. We didn't relate it to our goals. So in certain clinics, we may have to, if we're talking about our gait, we may have to put after our gait to progress patient towards short-term goal 1 of 50 feet ambulation. If we're doing straight leg raises, we may have to put to progress patient towards hip flexor control on the right side as per goal 3. Does that make sense? You may have to relate them to something specific in your eval, that you're not just doing these exercises to do them. Let's say that in the eval, the PT noticed absolutely nothing wrong with the patient's posture. Posture was perfect. Can we technically do posture exercises? If it's not an assessed goal, then no, we can't. Right? So we'd have to knock out chin tucks. We may have to knock out upright rows, right? So that's the thing we have to kind of pay attention to, is what our goals are. Our exercises should be moving our patients towards our goals. Gait will always move us towards our goals, because more than likely part of one of the goals is going to be endurance, right? Improving patients' cardiovascular endurance, right? So we can put that. Patient ambulated 20 feet times 2, front-wheeled walker, contact guard times 1, with 3 verbal cues for upright posture and looking ahead to improve patients' overall cardiovascular endurance. Now, what I said is, this is what I did, and this is why I did it. Does that make sense? So let's look at the chin tuck exercise. So we did chin tucks 3 times 10. What could we put after that to relate it to a goal? What could we put after that to relate it to a goal? And we don't have any goals. We're just making stuff up here as we go. This is kind of like, whose line is it anyway? We're making it up as we go. What about to promote? Now, let's not say to promote. To reduce forward head posture. Would that be relating it possibly to a goal? Yeah. Now do you see how you kind of relate them? They don't have to be necessarily to achieve goal number 3. Whoop, I knocked my mic out of my way. There we go. Testing, testing, I am still here. They don't necessarily have to say to achieve goal number 3. You can do that, but as long as what you're typing on there relates to one of your goals, that's what's important. And some patients will require that. Your sit to stand activities up there, right? You could say sit to stand times 5, min assist of 1 with no assisted device to progress patient towards independent transfers. Have you related to a goal now? Yeah. Does that help make some sense out of it? Is everyone kind of, as The Rock would say, are you smelling what The Rock is cooking? Is anyone fried yet? I know this is a lot, but I really want to help you guys with this. And we're going to do a couple notes. This is good. Okay, that's what I want to hear. Tandem stance. we may have put, so tandem stance, right leg back, eyes open, 3 times 30, handheld assist, or we may say single handheld assist, depending upon what you're writing. Handheld assist times 1 to improve patient's static standing balance. To improve patient's static standing balance, which is goal 2. Great, you can put that as well. Right? That's taking your notes to that next level. If you do that, that will protect you heavily from Medicare audits. Because at that point, Medicare is going to look at your notes and go, wow, these are really detailed and show why they're doing what they're doing. I'm not going to audit this patient. Even this, honestly, what I wrote down here, I'm going to be honest, most Medicare auditors are going to look at this and go, nope. And they're going to move on to somebody else. They're going to be looking for the patient, for the notes that says, objective. Patient walked 20 feet times 2 with rolling walker. Patient did exercises. And you're going to be amazed. There are PTs and PTAs out there that write SOAP notes like that. And you're going to follow them sometimes. You're going to go look at the note, and the note is literally going to be like 1 line in the subjective, 2 lines in the objective. The assessment's going to be continue towards goals. And the plan will be continue treatment as per plan of care. Those are the notes that are going to get audited. And that person's not going to have a good day. Because Medicare is going to bring them in and say, so when you worked with Mr. Johnson in room 13, and you say that you did exercises, what does that mean? Why did you bill 3 units worth of Therex? And the person's going to be like, well, it says in my SOAP note I did exercises. Well, what exercises did you do? Tell me, enlighten us. Well, because we talked to Mr. Johnson in room 2, and Mr. Johnson said he only did straight leg raises, and that was it. And you billed him for 3 units of Therex. Is that person in hot water? Yeah. Not only is that person in hot water, that person's the frog in the hot water pan that the water's slowly being turned up on. That's not even in they jumped into boiling water. That person's slowly getting cooked by that Medicare auditor. And a lot of times, guess what that's going to relate to then? That's going to relate to a fine. And understand, if Medicare audits your notes, they will fine your facility and they will fine you. And if they find one note that's bad, guess what that's probably going to indicate them to do? They're probably going to audit all of your notes then. Yeah, right? They're going to go through a lot of your notes, and you're going to be spending 2 to 3 hours. I had a clinician once that spent 2 to 3 hours with Medicare, that they went through 50 of his notes, and they fined him for all 50. And those aren't fun fines, folks. I think his fine was $10,000 till he was done with it. And your facility doesn't pay that. You pay that. So just saying, pay attention to your notes. The more detailed you can get, the better. There's also a fine line, right? I also, and some of you may have encountered this, I had a clinician that I managed that it took him 4 to 6 hours every night to write all of his SOAP notes. Because he literally wrote War and Peace for every patient. I'm not joking. He took, on average, like, you know how we have our SOAP note sheets back at the clinic or at the school? He would take 3 of those to write for one patient. Now that's the total opposite. That's too much, right? He documented every single thing that the patient's toes did, everything that their hands did. That's a little too in-depth, right? So there's a fair balance there. How are we feeling on objective? Yeah, I don't know how you can remember it either. I have trouble remembering what I just drank in my coffee cup, let alone when I did that. One of the things I'm going to recommend real quick before I move any further, if you are not writing your SOAP notes immediately after every visit, right? So if you're in the hospital, maybe you see 4 people before you write a single SOAP note. make sure you're doing little documentations for yourself. I used to carry a little pad in my pocket that I would write 302, and then I'd write my exercises down, and I write my gait level. Since then, I progressed to kind of doing a little dictation. So when I'm going to the next room, I'm often dictating into my phone, room 303, perform blah, 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 and I document it so that when I can go back and do my notes, I can remember what I wrote. Because again, I don't have, I know good memory. So I need help remembering what I did. Right? Sometimes there are days where I've done 20 patients and I didn't get a right note until the end. My notes suck at the end of that. Are we okay on objective? We ready to move to assessment? Okay, I'm gonna erase this. Again, I can't tell you. I'm like just an absolute kid with a new toy with this whiteboard stuff. This just makes me giggle inside. It does not take much to amuse Mr. McKeever. I'm just saying. All right. All right. So let's change colors, and we'll go up to the original colors for this one. So now we have our assessment. Right? What are some things that we know we can indicate in our assessment? We're not going to write our assessment yet, but what are some things we know that we could indicate in it? Progress, right? Good. Pain levels, right? Now, not numbers, but do we have a change in pain level? Yep, we have a change in pain level with this patient, right? We had an exercise that had pain. There's an assessment. Regressions and progressions, exactly. Anything to that effect goes in the assessment. Okay? So I know one of the things I taught you guys was patient tolerated treatment. I'm going to see if you've seen this. And would benefit from continued skilled therapy to progress towards assessed goals. Fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not very detailed. Right? That is last semester style assessment. Right? That's kind of just saying, okay, yeah, patient was able to do their exercises well, but we need more therapy to get them better. Great, we can have that. I mean, you could theoretically still leave that in your notes, but now we need to know why. Why do they need more therapy? Right? So we know pain level decreased after therapy. We know that, right? Because his pain went from 4 to 10. So his pain level decreased after therapy. What if his pain level went up? What else might we want to indicate in the assessment? What do you think? Why? Right? Because maybe we did Russian with this patient. That could drive his pain level up. Patient's pain level increased after therapy due to increased muscle recruitment with Russian e-stim. Great. Pain level decreased after treatment. We don't know why. We're not assessing why that pain level decreased, because that is now a PT level skill. We're just saying it happened, right? I'm also going to say that, but patient experienced increased pain with upright rows. Note, no numbers. All that's indicated is patient had increased pain when we did that. That is going to then go down and drive our plan when we get down here to plan. What else did we encounter with this patient? Did we give him cueing? Did we give, yeah, we gave him cueing with gait, right? We can relate, yeah, any difficulties we reserved, right? We can relate cueing to previous session, right? Patient required less verbal cueing. That's cueing at Honest is. This is why I don't write a lot, guys. Posture in gait. Now, if I say patient required less verbal cueing for posture and gait, I can also add than previous session. But if I put patient required less verbal cueing for posture and gait, I'm relating that to a previous session, right? I'm not relating it to the next patient in the next room. I'm relating that to a previous session. Now, some clinics may require you to put the previous session. Great. That's what the clinic requires. You put it in there. Your assessments can get pretty long. Any difficulties reserved? Let's say that patient had, let's change the color again. Patient had increased difficulty today with sit to stand. Now, if the assistance level hasn't changed, can they still have increased difficulty even though the assistant level didn't change? Yeah, it just means they worked a little harder, right? Or they'll tell us, oh, man, that was a little harder today. Okay, we note that. Right. We're going to note anything we see. What if we notice that a patient during gait that let's say we saw during gait noted right Trendelenburg I can spell Trendelenburg sign today. Right? Let's say we notice that. Did we diagnose him with a Trendelenburg sign? Or did we diagnose that he has right, or I'm sorry, that'd actually technically be left hip abductor weakness. Did we diagnose him with that? No, all we said is, hey, we saw it. I use noted a lot. Noted to me means that I saw it. Right? I may even put noted less verbal cueing for posture with gait today. Noted means that I visually observed it or observed less, right? So that's kind of stuff that you're looking at. Does that make sense? Does that help you guys with assessment a little bit? Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, if there are any changes. Okay, great. So let's say we did, maybe we did abdominal girth measurements, right? Sign, like I saw the signs and it opened up my mind. So let's say Sukana goes, what about measurements? So let's say we were doing abdominal girth measurements with this patient. The abdominal girth measurements are going to go where? The actual measurements themselves. Objective. Good. So we're going to put, you know, I don't know, like waist measurement is 32 inches or something to that effect. But let's say last session, his waist was 44 inches. Now we're going to have a thing stating that abdominal girth decreased from previous session. Does that make sense? Does that help you understand, Sukana? Right? We're not going to put it decreased by 10 inches or 10 centimeters. Again, I don't like to put any numbers in assessment. Now, your clinic may. And again, I'm speaking from the McKeever Clinic of Therapy. You know, you go to the Bob Dole Clinic of Therapy and it may be a little different. But this is what I've encountered in reading through the multiple documentation books. They typically don't want numbers in assessment, because an assessment, you can't put numbers in assessment. You can't assess. It's not, you're just either it is or it isn't. Does that make sense? If you did a sit and reach test and the patient reached further today, that would be a change you could document, right? Maybe they reached less. I use a lot of increase, decrease, more or less, that type of an idea. Because if they really want to see, you know, if they really want to see how it increased or how it decreased, you can go back. The documentation's there. You don't necessarily have to put, you know, maybe today I have 145 degrees, but yesterday I only had 90. You can go back and look at that change. Now, some clinics will say you have to put that in the assessment. Okay, if they do, you put it in. You go, thank you very much. I will do that. Good, sir. Does that help drive assessment? Are you good on assessment? Assessment's a little easier than objective. Objective takes a lot more data. All right. I'm going to leave my assessment here on purpose, because now we're going to go to probably the easiest part of your SOAP note, but it can also be the most difficult for some people. We're going to go to plan. No, not B. I don't want to put B. My brain's not working. It'd be somewhere else. Plan. All right. Plan, exactly. So, most common easy thing you'll see. Continue TX as per PT POC. Have you guys ever seen something like that? Yeah, that's the most basic. Again, that's last semester's level plan. Right? Now we got to take it a step further. We got to up our game here. Looking at our assessment, do we have any changes to make next session? We already talked about one with the upright rows. So let's talk about upright rows. What are we going to do? So I think the first thing we had was decrease reps. So we're going to put that. Decrease reps on upright rows. Next TX. There we go. All right. So we decrease reps. What else might we change for next session? Do we have anything to discuss with the PT? Yeah, according to our assessment right now, what do we have to discuss with the PT? There we go, right? Discuss Trendelenburg sign with PT. Definitely. We definitely want to do that. Right? Because that could be a sign of nerve damage developing. So we want to discuss it. And the PT may say, just keep an eye on it. But at least then we've documented where we discussed it with them. Right? I could also say, let's say I'm going to say, increase gait distance next TX. And let's go one further, and we're going to add bicep curls with 1 pound dumbbell. All right, now we've got a plan because we're making changes. Now, if the patient doesn't have any reason for those bicep curls, there's nothing in their treatment plan that requires anything to do with bicep curls, we can't add them. What else could we put in here that's kind of important with most patients? What could we review with them next session? Yeah, review HEP next session, right? Maybe because we're going to change some things in it, or maybe because they just don't have one yet. We could put that, and a lot of times I'm also going to put in here, if I'm in the outpatient world, I'm also going to indicate patient has 2 visits before re-eval. I put that a lot of times in my plan because we get lost in the shuffle. And then we'll go to see them and realize it's time for that patient's reevaluation and we're scheduled with them. And then it becomes chaotic. If I have this, now I got, okay, so in my head, I've got 2 more visits to see this patient. And then on that 3rd visit, who has to see them? The PT. Yeah, right? So now I can go, when I discuss the Trendelenburg with, let's say my PT is Dr. Resking, say, hey, patient had this Trendelenburg sign today. I just want to let you know about it. I'll keep an eye on it. And she may say, hey, well, check the next time you're in, I'm going to put a goal in there to check their range of motion with their hip abduction. Okay, great. I got that. Right. And I also say to her, I've got 2 more visits and then we need a re-eval. That puts it on her radar. And she doesn't have to keep track. She may have 25 patients that she's got 4 PTs or 3 PTs that are seeing, right? So we've got to help those PTs understand when they need re-evals. They're not, the documentation system will help, but this really helps keep track of it. How are you feeling? Does that help a little bit? Not comfortable with abbreviations yet. That's okay. You don't have to use abbreviations, Anthony. Absolutely not. You can write, theoretically, if you want to write everything out, go right ahead. Especially nowadays in electronic documentation, when I'm writing, I use more abbreviations than I do when I'm typing. Mainly because I can't get my R with a circle when I'm typing stuff out. Right? So I may write, just write, type out right. And plus, I type about 120 words a minute. So that doesn't kill me to write out whole things. Same thing like with texting. It always amazes me that people send me text messages and it's all letters. Could you spend a little bit of time? Right? Nothing annoys me more than when I get a text message back and the text message is K. Really? You couldn't even take the extra time to put O? Right? So yeah, absolutely, Anthony. If you want to write everything out, nothing wrong with writing it out. Maybe a little slower, but write it out. And then if your PT says, hey, you know, in our clinic, we tend to use RX for treatment. You can use that instead of TX. Great. Now you've got an idea and you can cut down one more thing. But yeah, nothing is wrong with writing everything out, especially when you're typing again, because, you know, I can't do B with a circle around it for bilateral. I may have to do bilat, period. Right? But again, if I write bilat, period, I might as well just write out bilateral, right? I mean, seriously, it's how many, a few more letters? I'm just saying. It's kind of silly. You see what symbols do mess you up. And sometimes, you know, if the person's that clear, sometimes you see my handwriting is horrible. This is why I type most of my stuff. My handwriting is horrible. It's not quite doctor level, but it's pretty darn close. How does everyone else feel? Did that help? I hope it did. I'm sweating like, whew, you have no idea. So what I'm going to do is, this is where we're at right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a SOAP Notes assignment where I'm going to give you certain information and you guys are going to put together a SOAP Note for me. All right. And that's the thing is, and that's just learning somebody else's style. That happens, right? Well, so here's the deal. So how many? So Sakina just asked, how many weeks since patient's surgery? That should be in their documentation. We may not have to document that all. Now, let's say they are telling you since they've had pain, that we may document, but all their stuff about their diagnosis is in the chart. We don't necessarily have to put every time patient is 2 weeks out from surgery, because that's in the chart. Patient is 3 days out from surgery. Well, it says date of injury, 5/9, DOS, date of surgery, 5/11. We can do math. You can if you want. If you're going to put that, that typically goes in subjective where you'll say, patient received in therapy room today, 3 days status post-surgery. You can put it there if you really wanted to. But again, in the real world, that's all in the electronic health record, so you don't necessarily have to put it. Woo-wee, that was a lot of stuff, huh? Would an assignment help you guys a little bit to practice some? Okay, so let me work on one of those today while I'm sitting at home sweating here. Let's stop sharing here. We're going to stop sharing. She's got to stop it. So I'll work on a quick assignment. I won't make it hard. It's not like it's going to be something where it's super duper in depth and it's going to totally tax you guys out, but something that can help reinforce this that I think will really help you guys. And we're going to write some more SOAP notes this semester as well. All right, I'm going to stop recording here. Do we have any other questions? And you'll get feedback on them, absolutely, from me. All right, I'm going to stop recording since we don't have any other questions.